Chapter 29:14. Suyu sensed that something was amiss and followed her gaze. He was slightly surprised to discover that in front of Mo Heng's chest, which had been pierced by the bone claw, there was a very special mark on his chest. Because his clothes were torn, he could easily see that there was a very special mark on his chest. The mark was in the shape of a pitch-black sword, surrounded by chains. It seemed to symbolize that the sword had been sealed. The sword was not drawn on, but imprinted into his flesh, leaving a deep indent on his chest. Unless he changed his body, he would never be able to erase the mark. You were enslaved by the Sword Sacred Clan? Bai Shui blurted out, revealing a huge secret. She hurriedly covered her mouth and looked around vigilantly. After confirming that no one had heard her, she immediately stepped forward and helped Mo Heng put his clothes back on. We did not see anything. We did not see anything. Mo Heng sighed. It's fine if you saw. The Sword Sacred Clan does not mind outsiders knowing. Suyu roughly understood the ins and outs of the conversation between the two. The craftsmanship genius of the Nine-Star Civilization had disappeared because he had been enslaved by the Sword Sacred Clan. The Nine-Star Civilization was a place where the strong preyed on the weak. He did not find it strange that something like this had happened. What was strange was that Mo Heng's forces had not come to rescue him. In the current Nine-Star Civilization, a genius could not have come from a poor background. Poor people lived in abandoned wastelands, running around every day in order to survive. How could they have the time to cultivate their craftsmanship talent? He must have come from a prestigious family. Anyway, I'm the only one left of the Mo family, so what if I tell the whole world? Who would dare risk being accused of the Sword Sacred Clan to come and rescue me? Mo Heng seemed to have accepted his fate, losing all will to resist. It turned out that the Mo family had once been a prestigious family, but for some unknown reason, they had disappeared. Even when Mo Heng was enslaved, no one dared to interfere. Bai Shui silently sighed, expressing her helplessness. Even though the Temple of Heaven was powerful, it was still only a powerful clan, far from being able to compete with the Sacred Clan. Not to mention that the Sword Sacred Clan was ranked third among the powerful sacred clans. Suyu asked thoughtfully, so what's your ranking in the famed Sword Saint Clan in terms of craftsmanship? At this point, Mo Heng revealed a trace of pride. Because of my identity as a slave, I was ranked 100th. In reality, it would not be difficult for me to be in the top 3. I could even be in first place. Being enslaved, Mo Heng was naturally unwilling to wholeheartedly forge artifacts for the Sword Sacred Clan. Therefore, he had been concealing his attainments in blacksmithing. His true attainments in artifact forging were shockingly high. Believe me, Mo Heng thought that Suyu and Bai Shui did not believe him. So he said, let me give you a simple example. The 10 families of the famous Sword Saint tribe nurtured the Absolute Heaven Sword. They spent an entire era nurturing the Absolute Heaven Sword. If everything goes as expected, the day the sword is unsheathed will be the day blood stains the sky. Oh, Bai Shui's eyes widened. What do you mean? And Mo Heng said disdainfully. Those 10 sword practitioners thought that their attainments were astonishing and they forged a flawless holy artifact. In reality, the forging process was riddled with flaws. The day the sword is unsheathed, the sword will definitely go out of control and harm all the guests. And Mo Heng then remembered that Suyu and the rest had also come to observe the birth of the Absolute Heaven Sword. Considering that you have saved me, I advise you not to go near the Absolute Heaven Sword. It will be best if you do not even step into the famous Sword Sacred Clan. Otherwise, your lives will be in danger. Suyu and Bai Shui became serious. And Mo Heng was a slave who had lost his freedom. There was no need for him to threaten them. What he said was most likely true, if his attainments in crafting artifacts were as brilliant as he claimed. Thank you for the reminder, Suyu said. But we need to go to the famous Sword Sacred Clan to obtain the primordial energy released when the Absolute Sword Heaven is born. I'm afraid we have no choice but to go. And Mo Heng sighed. Then good luck to you. Pausing, Mo Heng took out 2 black iron balls from his sleeves. Their surfaces were full of bumps and hollows. It was unknown what they were used for. I hope you will be of use. Mo Hung patted his butt. Let's go. I'll bring you to the famous Sword Sacred Clan. That's on the condition that you all have an invitation. At the mention of an invitation, Bai Shui took out her real invitation. She pouted. Shouldn't you open it for me? So you did not say a word. He gently swiped his finger over the letter, and several images appeared in the letter. Mo Hung happened to capture this scene. His pupils shrank, and the gaze he used to look at Su Yu had a deeper meaning. Let's go. Bai Shui happily put away the invitation. Mo Hung led the way without a change in expression. Half a day later, a golden path paved in the air appeared in front of them. At the end of the path was an incomparably huge long sword stabbed into the ground. It was not a real sword, but a building of the famous Sword Sacred Clan. But when they stepped onto the golden path, they discovered that not far ahead was the youth named Ada, who had abandoned Mo Hung and escaped alone. Ada, Mo Hung let out a sigh of relief. As long as you were safe, that's good. His words were filled with care and concern for Ada. In the face of danger, Mo Hung had pushed Ada away and used his own body to block the attack. From this, it could be seen that the relationship between the two was not ordinary. Hearing the voice behind him, Ada turned around. There was not much joy on his face. Instead, he muttered coldly, "You're not dead yet." He forced himself to walk back, calmly saying, "Thank you for just now." Although he said thank you, there was no gratitude in his eyes. In fact, he was a little disappointed that Mo Hung had not died at the hands of the skeleton. So you creased his brows. This young man should at least know how to repay kindness, right? But without understanding the relationship between the two and their grudges, he could not interrupt. But Bai Shui was much more direct. "Brat, can't you say something human? Are you cursing your benefactor to die? Without him, you would be long dead." Ada glared at Bai Shui unhappily. "I'm talking to my father. What does that have to do with you?" "Father? The two of them are father and son?" Ada looked at the bloodied Mo Hung with disgust. "Wait here. I'll go in first in case someone sees us." Huh! Bai Shui was really angry. How could a son look down on his father? She rolled up her sleeves. "Stop right there." But Mo Hung blocked Bai Shui, his expression complicated. "My son is immature. I hope the two elders will not mind him." Bai Shui was furious. Mo Hung, you were someone important in the past. How did you raise such a son? Aren't you spoiling him too much? Mo Hung did not speak, as if unwilling to explain the cause and effect. Su Yu's gaze flickered. Mo Hung was a slave of the famous Sword Sacred Clan. How could he have a son? Chapter 29:15. However, seeing that Mo Hung was silent and unwilling to say more, Su Yu naturally did not probe further. "Go inside," Su Yu said. Under Mo Hung's lead, the two arrived in front of the Sword Sacred Tribe's giant sword. At the entrance, there was a white-haired, red-haired old man whose entire body was burning with flames. He sat there, checking the invitations of the people who entered one by one. The inspection process was very slow, so there was a small queue in front of the door. Coincidentally, Su Yu actually saw a familiar person. It was Fugu Zhen, who had killed his companions on the abandoned civilization and then used the pear blossom fantasy to woo Xia Jingyu. At the moment, Feng Guchen was only an attendant. Beside him was a dignified, middle-aged woman with an extraordinary temperament. She held an invitation in her hand. Is the Wen clan still at the level of the Holy Clan? Su Yu was slightly surprised. I thought they were just an ordinary race. The senses between strong martial artists were very acute. Feng Guchen noticed Su Yu's gaze immediately. He turned his head to look, and his brows furrowed immediately. There was a hint of surprise in his expression. Although Su Yu was still wearing the black robe to conceal his true appearance, he had noticed Su Yu when they had brushed past each other in the abandoned civilization, and he felt that Su Yu seemed familiar. Now that they met again, it was too much of a coincidence. However, he couldn't remember where he had seen Su Yu before. Why did he feel like he had met him before? What surprised him the most was that the other party was able to get an invitation from the famed Sword Sacred Clan. Didn't that mean that he had the strength of a great saint? "Gu Chan, who are you looking at?" The dignified beauty followed his gaze and murmured in surprise. Has the Temple of Heaven been invited as well? Fenguchen was slightly puzzled. Could the black-robed man be from the Palace of Heaven? But the Palace of Heaven should not have been invited. Looking at Su Yu again, Fengu Zhen had a faint sense of hostility. Master, this person's identity is suspicious. It's best to investigate. The dignified beauty looked at the black-robed Su Yu and said expressionlessly, "The famous Sword Saint clan is here, so there is no need to overstep your authority. They will check it themselves." Soon, it was the Wind clan's turn. The dignified beauty took out the invitation letter and smoothly passed the inspection. Before leaving, her red lips parted slightly, and she said a few words. The red-haired old man, whose entire body was covered in raging flames, nodded without batting an eyelid. After 5 minutes, it was finally Su Yu and Bai Shue's turn. First, Bai Shue took out her invitation. The red-haired old man looked at it, then at Bai Shue. Bai Shue's identity was very easy to identify. Anyone with a slightly higher level would know that Bai Shue was from the Temple of Heaven. The Temple of Heaven was only at the level of an aristocratic family, so in theory, it was not invited. However, the Sword Sacred tribe only recognized the invitation, not the person, so they did not stop them. When it was Su Yu's turn, the red-haired old man looked at him and said, "Take out your invitation letter and official document." The invitation letter was one thing, but the document. Back when Zhang Xian cleared the passageway to the 9-star civilization, the document had been destroyed because he had seen through it. There was no way he could take out a second set. Moreover, when other people entered the famed Sword Saint tribe, they only needed to check the invitation letter. Why did Su Yu need to check the official document? What is the reason for checking the document? Su Yu asked coldly. That dignified beauty must have said something. A hint of coldness flickered in his heart. He did not find trouble with Fengu Chan, but the latter took the initiative to find him. The red-haired old man's face was filled with a fierce aura. The reason is that I want to be examined. He could examine whoever he wanted. If he did not agree, he could choose not to come. Su Yu's eyes narrowed, but he did not intend to argue with him here. That would only be of no help and would instead cause more trouble. The soul energy in his palm changed, transforming into an official document. It was the same one he had used before. He just did not know if he could hide it from the red-haired old man in front of him. The cultivation level of the other party was not something the ordinary people at the entrance of the passageway could compare to. "There is no need to check. He is my friend," Mo Hong said expressionlessly as he walked up from behind with his hands clasped behind his back. The red-haired old man's gaze shifted toward Mo Hong, a hint of disdain in his eyes. "I was wondering who it was. So it's that good for nothing." He was especially rude to Mo Hong. However, it seemed that Mo Hong still had some influence. The red-haired old man did not make things difficult for Mo Hong. He glanced at Su Yu. "Since you are a friend of that good-for-nothing, there is no need for the official document. Let me check the invitation letter." Su Yu took out the invitation letter. The red-haired old man took out a mirror and looked at it. A message was engraved into the mirror. "All right, go in," the red-haired old man said expressionlessly. With that, Su Yu successfully passed through, stepping into the famed Sword Holy tribe. At that moment, a shocking wave of heat assaulted him, as if he was in a giant furnace. Flames could be seen drifting everywhere. He had to protect his body with his energy the entire time, or he would definitely be burned. Mo Hang's voice came from behind him. "The manner of the famed Sword Holy tribe is a natural crafting furnace." Su Yu stopped in his tracks, cupping his fists toward him. "Thank you for helping me out." Mo Hong waved his hands nonchalantly. "Compared to the debt of saving my life, this is nothing." He looked at Bai Shue, who was waiting for Su Yu not far away. "I will not accompany you any further. Farewell." Su Yu watched him leave, then went to meet up with Bai Shue. The latter had a look of disappointment. "I thought you were stuck at the door. I was happy for nothing." Su Yu took a look at her face, which was still showing signs of relief, and said, "Did you worry for nothing? Dream on." Bai Shue rolled her eyes. Su Yu's gaze swept to the southeast corner. A figure quietly left from his shadows. It was Fengu Chan. "I might have met some unfriendly enemies here, Suyu said. Do you choose to continue with me, or move alone? Perhaps there would be a small conflict with the Phone clan. You want to abandon me? Bai Shui asked without hesitation. How could she feel at ease being surrounded by so many great sages? It was safer to stay by Suyu's side. Suyu had a faint smile. You're one of my people? Bai Shui blushed. You see me naked. No matter what, I'm still half yours. I'm sorry I'm still young. Old woman, please stay away from me. Suyu smiled. Bai Shui clenched her fists, glaring at Suyu angrily. To be honest, I really want to hammer you to death. The favorable impression that she had accumulated with great difficulty along the way was instantly wiped clean by him. Wait until I get the primordial energy, Bai Shui said angrily. We'll go our separate ways and never meet again. Suyu smiled without saying a word. Under the guidance of a servant, he stepped down to the basement level. The absolute heaven sword was being forged underground. Guest, it's very hot inside. Please be careful. The servant stood at the entrance, not daring to advance any further. Suyu turned a blind eye to it and stepped in. With Prince Mirrorflower's body, these flames posed no threat to him at all. But to Bai Shui, it was fatal. In terms of danger, it was no less than the aftermath of the burial battlefield. Chapter 29:16. Bai Shui stood at the entrance, hesitating for a moment. Finally, she swallowed a mysterious pill and stepped down the stairs. The shocking heat made Bai Shui look pained, but she clenched her teeth and persisted as she walked deeper underground. All she did was to fulfill her promise and compensate the great families that had suffered heavy losses. Suyu silently praised her as he watched. The two of them followed the stairs to the depths of the underground. It was a gigantic, artificially excavated prototype platform. In the center of the platform was a huge pit burning with intense flames. At first glance, it looked like an old well. The difference was that there were special stands around the well for the guests to watch. Suyu came to the side of the deep pit. This pit was probably the furnace for crafting weapons. Bai Shui also walked over and stared at the colorful flames. Inside are the flames accumulated by the Sacred Sword clan for countless eras. They're all disastrous flames. The weakest can kill an early-stage Heavenly Law Master. The strongest, it is said that there is a trace of disastrous flame inside, taken from the corpse of a myriad saint. Rumor has it that the myriad saint died from the disastrous flame. Myriad saint? Suyu's pupils shrank. The myriad saints refer to the most powerful people in the chaotic heavenly clan. They were powerful beyond compare and had reached the peak of the late-stage Heavenly Law Master. How could someone like that die from the disastrous flame? Suyu's many years of experience told him that the so-called disastrous flame was a restraint placed on the weak by a higher-level being. The most powerful being in the entire Taichu realm was probably the Emperor of the Sacred Mountain. But was it necessary for them to harm their own descendants? He felt that his understanding of the Taichu realm was a little limited. Look! Suddenly, Bai Shui tugged at Suyu's arm and pointed excitedly at the furnace. The surrounding guests, and even the great saints began to turn pale. Amidst the countless mixed flames, a strange flame actually appeared. Unlike the other random flames, this flame was in the shape of a human. It walked in a furnace with its hands behind its back. Everywhere it passed, the other disastrous flames retreated, leaving a large, empty space as if they were naturally afraid of it. The human-shaped flame was like a king looking down on the crowd. Perhaps it heard the uproar from above. It raised its head and looked up. With just a sweep of his gaze, the temperature of the entire platform abruptly doubled. The great sages immediately circulated the energy in their bodies to resist the sudden increase in temperature. However, the sudden increase in temperature caught everyone off guard, and they were still affected by it. The bodies of many great sages were scalded, causing a series of uproars. Great sages were already like this, let alone existences that were not great sages. For example, people like Fenggu Chan, who had not even reached the ancient sage realm, were burned on the spot. Fortunately, there was a great sage beside him who quickly extinguished the flames and saved him. White Snow's condition was slightly better, but her body was burning in pain. Upon seeing that, Suyu patted his shoulder with his 5 fingers. The 8 great Yuan-level domains formed a temporary true isolation realm, isolating him from the scorching heat. As such, White Snow's condition was immediately alleviated. However, how could this move escape the eyes of the great sages present? All of them were shocked. There was no one in the area who could bring out the true world with just a wave of his hand. The dignified beauty's pupils constricted fiercely. She immediately stared at Fengu Zen and secretly asked with a stern gaze, "How did you encounter him?" Bringing out the true world with just a wave of his hand was something that even the 10,000 saints might not be able to do. Fengu Zen did not see anything special about Suyu's move. He said, "I encountered him by accident." He was puzzled. What was wrong with the master? The dignified beauty was a little remorseful. Her behavior at the door was a little rash. Perhaps she had unintentionally offended this person. Behave yourself from now on. Don't provoke him again. The dignified beauty stared at Suyu, who was dressed in a black robe. She felt a sense of trepidation. Fengu Zen frowned. Was this necessary? The black-robed man looked very ordinary. He was not a big shot. In the grandstand, there was a blood-colored sedan carried by 4 puppets. As the curtain of the sedan was lifted, a ferocious and bloody face could be vaguely seen. Its deep and serene gaze swept across Suyu's body. Its eyes were filled with fear, but there was also desire. Suyu felt helpless. In the end, he still could not hide from the senses of these great sages. The existence of the temporary true world had indeed been discovered. After obtaining the energy he wanted, he had to leave this place immediately. Otherwise, there might be trouble. Although everyone was shocked, they did not forget that the focus of their attention at the moment should be on the human-shaped flame in the furnace. It glanced up and walked up with its hands behind its back. As it went up, the surrounding temperature became more and more terrifying. Even the great sages began to be unable to withstand it. One by one, they retreated to the stairs and kept their distance. Even Suyu felt a burning pain in his body. He had no choice but to retreat. He was deeply shocked. Just by approaching it, it had such terrifying power. If it came out completely, wouldn't it be able to wipe out all the strong men present? Could this flame be the strongest, disastrous fire that had killed all the saints in the legends? Seeing that the disastrous fire was about to come out of the furnace, the guests were extremely vigilant and uneasy. However, just as the disastrous fire was about to come out, an ancient spell appeared above the furnace, and mysterious runes descended. Seeing that, the human-shaped disastrous fire seemed to have some misgivings. It returned to the furnace and disappeared into the flames that filled the sky without a trace. The surrounding temperature returned to normal, but no one could remain calm. I really don't know how the famous Sword Saint clan managed to retrieve this disastrous fire back then. It's too terrifying. If that disastrous fire was released, I don't know how much damage it would cause. Fortunately, it is trapped in the furnace. This furnace has been sealed by the famous Sword Saint clan for countless years, so the disastrous fire can't come out. While they were discussing, a warm and gentle voice came from the stairs. "Ha ha, I'm sorry, I have something to do, so I can't accompany you immediately." An old man with a white beard and a white robe, with a sage-like demeanor, walked down the stairs. Seeing him, all the great sages present stood up unconsciously and took the initiative to salute him. "Greetings, great sage Huang." The family of the famous Sword Saint clan was surnamed Huang. The old man in the white robe in front of them was one of the great sages of the famous Sword Saint clan and also the most powerful saint. No need to be so polite. Great Sage Huang was very gentle, and he chatted with the people present for a while with a smile. Dong! At that moment, the furnace trembled slightly, as if something inside had exploded. An extremely pure stream of air rushed up from the depths of the furnace. Many of the great sages were pleasantly surprised, and they grabbed it. So you also grabbed a bit of it. The energy was extremely pure, without any impurities. He could absorb it all and transform it into his own strength. Chapter 29:17. He gently inhaled, and the energy entered his body, quickly transforming into heavenly energy. There was a slight increase in his cultivation base. Bai Shui also received a trace, and after absorbing it, her face was full of surprise. The rumors were true. The primordial energy really had an irreplaceable effect on cultivation base. The rest of the experts were visibly moved, especially the great sages. The desire in their eyes could not be concealed. At their level, raising their cultivation base by even a little bit required the accumulation of countless resources. It was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Most of the time, exhausting all the resources would not necessarily be able to reach the next level. But now, the primordial energy gave them endless hope. Noticing their expressions, Huang Dasheng was very satisfied and said with a smile, "As you can see, the absolute heaven sword is about to be born, and it has already begun to leak primordial energy." The great sages restrained their expressions, and their eyes flickered. There was no free lunch in the world. They knew this very well. Why did the famous Sword Sacred clan not keep such magical primordial energy for themselves, but give it to outsiders? The famous Sword Sacred clan is willing to share the primordial energy with everyone present, Huang Dasheng said with a smile. But we also have a small, presumptuous request. As expected, all the great sages looked as if they had expected this. The great sage of the Feng clan, who was also the dignified beauty, had a calm smile on her face. "Great Sage Huang, please speak. If we can do it, we will not refuse." Huang Dasheng smiled and looked around at the great sages. Seeing them nod, he said, "When the absolute heaven sword is born, the seal of this furnace will be temporarily opened. I hope that everyone could do me a favor. The moment the seal is opened, please maintain the substitute seal together." Huang Dasheng took out a round plate. They were not unfamiliar with this item. It was a formation plate. Some formations were engraved on Dao tools in advance, and after activating the Dao tool, the formations inside would naturally be displayed. "The seal will be opened?" The great sage's expressions changed. Just now, they had seen a super terrifying existence with their own eyes, a humanoid tribulation fire. It had not left the seal, but it had erupted with terrifying power. If they opened the seal and it escaped, who would be able to leave this place alive? No one could, right? Are you kidding? The blood demon let out a sinister and angry voice. "We're not interested in risking our lives for a little bit of your primordial energy." These old monsters who had lived for countless years had witnessed too many people die because of greed. They understood that compared to worldly possessions, their lives were more important. That was why he cherished his life so much. From the looks of it, the human-shaped tribulation flame had been trying to break through the seal. When the seal was opened, would the humanoid tribulation fire let go of such a great opportunity that was hard to come by in an epic? That was impossible, right? Therefore, Huang Dasheng wanted them to face the human-shaped tribulation fire head-on and seal it so that it couldn't escape. Even the Feng clan's great saint's expression changed. She quickly said, "If this is your request, please forgive me for not agreeing." He wanted to buy her life for a little bit of primordial energy. Her life was not that worthless. The other great sages showed signs of giving up. No one was willing to take the risk. Huang Dasheng seemed to have expected this. He said, "Everyone, please rest assured. My formation plate has been refined by my clansmen for 2 generations. In terms of power, it is not weaker than a real seal. As long as everyone works together to operate this array disc, I guarantee that nothing will go wrong." However, none of the great saints dared to answer. They did not intend to put their lives in the hands of an arrayed disc that they had never seen before. Huang Dasheng chuckled. "If you don't believe me, you can demonstrate it to everyone." With a flick of his finger, the formation plate was activated, and a huge sealing formation was immediately condensed from it, sealing the exit. The expressions of the great sages changed slightly. The Feng clan's great saint narrowed his eyes. "What does this mean?" Huang Dasheng still smiled. "Everyone, you will know if you can open it or not." The Feng clan's great saint and the other great sages exchanged glances and acted at the same time. The power of 8 great sages activating their boundless divine skills at the same time could be imagined. It caused a drastic change in the primordial chi of heaven and earth on the spot. However, the seal did not even produce a ripple, not to mention breaking. This time, the 8 great sages were really shocked. The strength of the seal was really beyond their expectations. Huang Dashing retracted the power at his fingertips. The array disk stopped operating and the seal dissipated. He said confidently, "As you can see, the seal that I casually activated is already so powerful. If you are willing to work together to activate it with all your might, the seal's power can be imagined. That human-shaped tribulation fire is powerful, but it definitely can't do anything to you." After seeing the power of the array disk with their own eyes, the great sages began to waver. It seemed that the risk was not that great. In addition, our Sword Sacred clan has refined a Tao artifact that specializes in collecting primordial energy. It can absorb all the primordial energy that is dissipated to the maximum extent and not let it go to waste. If you are willing to help, I am willing to distribute all the primordial energy collected to you according to the amount of credit you have contributed. As he spoke, Huang Dashing took out 2 very ordinary iron balls. They were densely covered in cracks, as if they were about to break. If Huang Dashing had not taken them out, they would have thought that they were some inferior things. The great sages who were tempted were completely shaken. When the absolute heaven sword was born, the primordial energy would definitely erupt in an eruption. It was almost impossible to collect all of it, and most of it would definitely be lost. However, the Sword Sacred clan had prepared a Tao artifact for this. If they could collect all of it and distribute it to them, the primordial energy would definitely be above their expectations. Good. I am one. Old Demon Shui, who was the first to object, was the first to agree. Next was the Great Sage of the Foam Clan, followed by the Great Sage of the Thunder Clan. Soon, all 8 great sages agreed. Huang Dashing smiled. "Your choice is correct." Then, he looked at the remaining guests. Most of them came with their elders, and their strength was limited. At most, they were ancient sages. "If you are willing to help, there will also be a certain reward," Huang Dashing said. Every bit of energy he had would increase the power of the array disk by a bit, so why not? Of course, they agreed. With 8 great sages holding the line, how could they be in danger? Good. Everyone, please wait and see. Huang Dashang smiled slightly and was about to leave when his ears suddenly twitched. It seemed that someone was talking to him through telepathy. Huang Dashing revealed a surprised expression. He lifted his eyes to look at Su Yu, a strange expression in his eyes. Obviously, someone had conveyed the news of Su Yu summoning the immortal realm to the unaware Huang Dashing. He pretended not to know, smiled at Su Yu, and returned to the ground as if nothing had happened. Chapter 29:18. Su Yu did not speak. Any sound transmission here could be heard by the great sages present. His gaze flickered slightly as he stared at the furnace, deep in thought. Mo Hong had said that the appearance of the absolute heaven sword would definitely cause a huge problem. Could the huge problem he spoke of be related to the human-shaped disastrous fire? Rumble. At that moment, there was another muffled sound from within the furnace. A bubble full of primordial energy exploded. The energy that escaped surged up. Everyone once again joined the fray. Only Su Yu and Bai Shui did not move. The ones fighting were all great sages. If the 2 of them joined in, they would not be able to get anything and could easily expose their cultivation levels. Of course, they were most calm because both of them had a metal ball. That was a mysterious object that Mo Hong had given them in return. They had not thought it was anything good, but who knew it was something the Sacred Sword Clan had prepared to collect primordial energy. Moreover, the Sacred Sword Clan's metal ball was covered in cracks. Although theirs was bumpy, it looked much better. It could be imagined that the metal ball they had obtained was of a higher grade. When it came to collecting primordial energy, their metal ball would definitely be of greater use. Thus, they gave up fighting over this tiny bit of primordial energy in front of them. Time passed bit by bit. More and more bubbles appeared, and the frequency became more and more ordinary. Finally, he knew that the doctor had caused a huge commotion that was as loud as a thunderclap, causing the entire furnace to shake nonstop. Only then did Huang Dasheng lead the other three great sages from the clan over. They stared at the violent shaking of the disastrous fire in the furnace, faintly revealing a giant sword-shaped shadow. They all revealed expressions of joy. The absolute heaven sword is about to form. Come, sacrifice the sword. A youth was brought down. He was Emohang's son, Ada. Ada's face was filled with fear as he was forcefully brought to the front of the furnace. Huang Dasheng stared at the furnace, his eyes filled with greed as he muttered, "Hapta, bear with it, and it will be over. It is not that I am cruel, but as a member of the Sacred Sword Clan, you need to have a sense of self-sacrifice. Do you understand?" After saying that, he took out a thick hollow copper tube and stabbed it into Ada's heart. In an instant, thick blood flowed out of the copper tube and dripped into the furnace. Speaking of which, it was strange. Even great sages would find it hard to endure the terrifying temperature of the furnace. It could even burn them. However, Ada's blood was not affected at all. It fell directly into the depths of the furnace. In the end, it landed on the huge, sword-shaped shadow. Crackle! It was as if a muffled thunder had exploded in the furnace, and the entire sword's sacred clan began to shake. The sword-shaped shadow quickly turned blood-red, like a blood sword hidden in a furnace. The absolute heaven sword is about to be born. Huang Dasheng's pupils shrank as he panted heavily. However, a scene that made him and everyone present feel uneasy appeared. On the absolute heaven sword, a black human-shaped tribulation flame was faintly discernible. The humanoid tribulation fire was indeed waiting for an opportunity, and it didn't hide its goal at all. The famed sword sacred clan could either watch the absolute heaven sword suffocate in the furnace or open the seal and let the absolute heaven sword come out. Huang Dasheng gritted his teeth. "Everyone, I'm counting on you." He took out the formation plate and threw it into the air. The formation plate flew right above the furnace. The great sage of the Feng clan, old Demon Shui, and others did not dare to hesitate and immediately instilled their strength into it. The 8 great sages worked at the same time, and the formation plate was almost at its peak. "The rest of you, please help us," Huang Dasheng shouted. Su Yu and the others immediately took action. Although their strength was relatively weak, when combined, it was still a force that could not be underestimated. It was probably equivalent to half a great sage. In an instant, the formation plate was completely activated. A grayish seal descended and covered the gap in the furnace. Huang Dasheng and the 3 great sages of the same clan waited for the right time. They looked at each other and shouted in unison, "Absolute Heaven Sword, come out!" They roared, and at the same time, they activated some kind of ancient technique. Kacha, kacha, kacha sounds came from the furnace. The blood-red absolute heaven sword quickly floated up. Looking closely, the surface of the absolute heaven sword was wrapped in countless chains, binding it in the furnace. It was as if they were afraid that the absolute heaven sword would leave the furnace in advance. At this moment, under the control of Huang Dasheng and the others, the absolute heaven sword that bound it was loosened. The absolute heaven sword let out a strong sword cry, expressing its excitement, and reached the exit of the furnace at the fastest speed possible. However, the existence of the furnace seal hindered the birth of the absolute heaven sword. The most critical moment had arrived. Huang Dasheng and the others looked at each other, and at the same time, they activated some kind of Tao artifact. The primordial seal that had been sealed for an entire era was finally opened. The huge absolute heaven sword rose into the sky and instantly rushed out of the furnace. However, there was also a black shadow that made one's hair stand on end along with it. "Stop it!" Huang Dasheng shouted. How could the great sage of the Feng clan and the others dare to hesitate? They immediately controlled the formation, making it like a huge spider web, enveloping the afterimage, and then quickly pressing it towards the furnace. As long as it was pressed back and covered with the primordial seal, the disastrous flame in human form would not be able to escape. However, The disastrous flame in human form had waited for an opportunity with great difficulty. I could let it go. His body shook, and an extremely violent black tribulation fire erupted, burning the entire formation. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. The formation that the 8 great sages couldn't shake even when they joined forces was now being burned by the black disastrous flame, and it was about to explode. Everyone's scalps went numb. They had completely underestimated the terror of the disastrous flame in human form. Just as the formation was about to shatter, the disastrous flame in human form seemed to lose its strength, and then it was quickly pressed into the furnace. It resisted with all its might, but it still couldn't stop its fall. In the end, it was pressed into the furnace bit by bit. The primordial seal immediately closed again, sealing the disastrous flame in human form. The disastrous flame in human form fiercely smashed against the seal, trying to escape, but to no avail. The power of the primordial seal was several levels stronger than that of the formation plate. In the end, the disastrous flame in human form returned to the bottom of the furnace, completely giving up on rushing out. Whoosh! The 8 great sages were covered in sweat, and they entered a state of exhaustion. The short confrontation had drained them of almost all their strength, leaving them exhausted. If the disastrous flame in human form had lasted a little longer, they definitely wouldn't have been able to withstand it. Our lives are hanging by a thread. The great sage of the Foam clan sighed. Old Demon Shue chuckled. But it's worth it. Everyone's eyes looked at the absolute heaven sword that had appeared. The absolute heaven sword in front of them was hundreds of feet long, and its surface was full of potholes and unknown broken stones. Everyone present knew that it was the impurities that had been stained during the refining process. Chapter 29:19. Most of its 300-meter-long body was made up of impurities accumulated over an epoch. Of course, there was also the huge amount of primordial energy that they desired. Now, as long as all these impurities were broken, the primordial energy would explode. However, Huang Dasheng and the other clansmen held onto the absolute heaven sword and did not intend to take the next step. His eyes were also fixed on the absolute heaven sword. He didn't care about the weakened state of the 8 great sages at all. Old Demon Shue urged, "What are you waiting for? Quickly release the primordial energy." The other great sages urged. They had already sealed the human-shaped tribulation fire. Now, it was time for the Sword Sacred clan to fulfill their promise. Hearing this, Huang Dasheng finally turned his head and looked at them. There was a strange look in his eyes. "There's one thing I forgot to tell everyone. The impurities in the absolute heaven sword have accumulated for an epoch. It won't be easy to remove them. However, if we don't break it, the absolute heaven sword can't be considered to have truly been born. Right now, it can only be considered as a sword embryo. There's such a thing. However, the precipitated impurities were something that even the tribulation fire could not do anything to. It was indeed not something that could be easily broken. However, this is not a reason for you to refuse to fulfill your promise," the great sage of the Wind clan berated. Huang Dasheng hurriedly waved his hand. "You misunderstand. We don't intend to go back on our words. We will definitely give you what we should give you. We just hope that you can help us with a small matter." Everyone frowned. The Sword Sacred clan had not made this clear in advance. Now that the situation had come to a head, he suddenly added conditions. It was really disgusting. However, they had already come this far, and the primordial energy was right in front of them. How could they be willing to give up? "All right, what else do you want to do? Say it," Old Blood Demon said impatiently. The great sage of the Foam clan also frowned. "After this, if there are any more conditions, then don't blame us for being impolite." They decided to attack one last time. Huang Dasheng said with a smile, "Don't worry. The last favor will definitely be the last one." The great sage of the Foam clan restrained his displeasure and said with a taut face, "What's the matter? Say it, but it's best not to go beyond our ability." It's actually very simple for you. Anyone can do it." Huang Dasheng's expression became strange for some reason. Old Demon Shui and the great saint of the Phone Clan caught the subtle change in his expression. Su Yu, who had been vigilant all along, was the first to notice it. His heart skipped a beat, and the lines of fate fluctuated. Not good. In the blink of an eye, Su Yu grabbed by Shui and rushed toward the exit even faster than the Phone Clan's great saint and Old Demon Shui. Then, with a shocking speed, it left the ground and charged outside. The Phone Clan's great sage and Old Demon Shui cursed silently. Su Yu had taken the lead, and they were already one step too late to leave. The two of them flashed away at the same time. However, Su Yu's actions had forced Huang Dasheng and the rest of the people to take action in advance. What we need your help with is to borrow your blood and soul. Great Sage Huang and 3 other great sages of the same clan picked up the heaven-severing sword and swept it towards the 8 great sages present. In order for the absolute heaven sword to truly appear, it would require the blood and souls of 8 supreme experts to be sacrificed to the sword. In this way, the absolute heaven sword that had absorbed their blood and souls would truly awaken. It would break through the impurities and truly appear in the world. Therefore, this invitation to observe the birth of the absolute heaven sword was a huge conspiracy from the very beginning. The people who were invited were all going to be sacrificed to the sword. Famous Sword Sang Clan, how dare you plot against us? A great sage was furious, and he erupted with earth-shattering combat power. He was holding a thick and sturdy mace in his hand, and its size was not even inferior to the absolute heaven sword. The material used was the rare, 9-colored divine stone. Bang! He swung the mace, trying to break the absolute heaven sword. However, the result was that the mace in his hand was like a sand sculpture in front of the absolute heaven sword, shattering into dust on the spot. The absolute heaven sword ruthlessly brushed past his body, and this terrifying existence of the great sage level actually turned into a cloud of blood mist on the spot. The blood mist was completely absorbed by the absolute heaven sword, leaving nothing behind. However, the absolute heaven sword's momentum did not diminish, and it continued to sweep. The area of the platform was only so big, and these great sages had no extra space to dodge. They could only bite the bullet and fight back. However, without exception, no matter how amazing the divine techniques, Dao artifacts, or domain power was, it was of no use. They were all ruthlessly crushed by the absolute heaven sword. One by one, the great sages were like bags of blood, all crushed in a blood mist, and then absorbed by the absolute heaven sword. When it swept past the blood demon, his 4 puppets carrying the blood palanquin screamed and rushed forward to try to block it. However, the result was still swept into powder. The sword momentum was not extinguished, and the blood demon was beaten into blood mist on the spot. The slight difference was that one of the drops of blood mist took the opportunity to enter the depths of the ground and disappeared. When the sword momentum swept towards the great sage of the Wind Clan, she took out a clan treasure from her clan. Inside, there was an endless power of wind. However, it still could not block the attack of the absolute heaven sword, and was shattered on the spot. The great sage of the Wind Clan was also smashed into blood mist, and then absorbed by the absolute heaven sword. However, in a part of the blood mist, there was a strong power of wind that swept away the blood mist. Huang Dasheng said angrily, "The great sage of the Wind Clan and the blood demon are 2 cunning old things. They really have a lot of life-saving techniques." Although they were beaten into blood mist, a part of the blood mist that had already escaped could definitely reform itself, and its strength would not be reduced at all. The blood and souls absorbed by the 8 great sages are not complete, so the absolute heaven sword cannot appear. Don't worry, we still have a trick up our sleeves outside. They may not be able to escape. The 4 great sages immediately rushed out and chased after the 2 great sages who had escaped. At the same time, many experts of the Sword Sacred Clan rushed in and detained the relatively weak guests on the spot. What happened here was a devastating blow to the reputation of the Sword Sacred Clan, and it must not be leaked out. Therefore, These people would either die or become slaves of the Sword's sacred clan for the rest of their lives, never to betray them. The group of people was taken away. The people of the Sword's sacred clan simply cleaned up the battlefield and left in a hurry. Little did they know that not long after they left, a hair-thin black flame slowly flowed out of the formation plate above the furnace. It turned into a figure the size of a finger, and its hands formed a seal. It was actually imitating the technique of Huang Dasheng and the others. And the function of the technique was to open the original seal. Amidst the boundless tribulation fire, a humanoid tribulation fire with his hands behind his back slowly walked to the top of the furnace. He looked at the slowly opening tribulation fire above him and said in a hoarse voice, "Seem to feel the aura of a divine body." Among the people just now, the only one with a holy body was Suyu. Chapter 29:20. Back to Suyu. After rushing out of the ground, he did not immediately flee out of the mansion. Instead, he leaped and hid in a remote courtyard. What are we waiting for if not now? Bai Shui was panicking. Things had changed drastically, completely beyond her expectations. The Mingjian sacred clan dared to risk the wrath of the world by deceiving and killing the great saints of the sacred clan. Once this was exposed, it would be a disaster for the Mingjian sacred clan. It could even be predicted that there would be a grand sacred clan war in the near future. At the same time, it could also be seen that the Mingjian sacred clan would never allow them to escape and leak the news. So, Suyu did not escape immediately, but dared to stay? Sure. Suyu immediately gestured for silence. Don't act rashly. Huh? Bai Shui realized that something was wrong. She immediately quieted down and observed secretly. Suddenly, a violent wave came from the depths of the ground. A drop of dark red blood and a mist of blood rushed out of the ground one after another. After the two appeared, they immediately rushed out of the mansion. There was only one entrance to the mansion of the Mingjian sacred clan. They could only rush through it. However, just as they approached the entrance, a sharp sword energy suddenly pierced through from the exit. With a scream, the blood bead formed by old demon Shui was cut into hundreds of small blood beads on the spot. The sword energy did not slow down, slashing toward the blood mist of the great saint of the Feng clan. The latter reacted and immediately floated backward. The 100 blood beads formed by old demon Shui quickly condensed into a complete blood bead and retreated. As they retreated, the two reconstructed their bodies. At the same time, they rushed toward the top of the mansion. They intended to use the strength of the great saints to forcefully break through the sword-shaped mansion of the Mingjian sacred clan. However, when they reached the top, sharp swords descended like a storm, bombarding the two. Barely able to condense their bodies, they immediately displayed the secret techniques of the great saints. One was a boundless gale, the other was a sea of blood. They flew toward the sky with the momentum of toppling mountains and overturning seas. Rumble, the gale swept through the sea of blood, forming a rotating tornado that shattered the falling swords. Moreover, the tornado shot straight up into the sky. Bang! With a muffled sound, the top of the mansion was finally broken open. The two of them were overjoyed. They quickly hid in the tornado and escaped. The gap was right in front of them, and the two of them only needed an instant to successfully leave. Once they reached the outside world, it would be like sand in a desert, leaving no traces behind. However, just as they were about to rush out, a 9-colored ruler flashed through the gap. The ruler slammed down viciously. An array of 9-colored light slashed through the air, shattering the blood sea tornado. The Emperor's ruler and the tornado, the two of them retreated in a panic. They stared at the gap, their faces filled with shock. The Emperor's ruler was the sacred weapon of Emperor Xiaoyao. Why would he appear here? No, it's a replica. Old Demon Shui recognized it and was shocked. The great sage of the Feng clan looked up and vaguely saw a person with half a body. His pupils shrank. The first clone of Emperor Xiaoyao. The one waving the Emperor replica ruler was none other than the first clone of Emperor Xiaoyao. The first clone of Prince Xiaoyao, who had been sealed by Suyu back then, had recovered more than half of its body. With the Emperor replica ruler in his hand, one attack could produce the strength of a great saint. What's going on? Even the Emperor is involved? Old Demon Shui was even more shocked. The two of them looked extremely serious. They stared at the clone of Emperor Xiaoyao and did not dare to move forward. Because the Absolute Heaven Sword is the second sacred weapon that Emperor Xiaoyao custom-made for himself. Deep underground, Huang Daxing's cold laughter came from the depths of the ground. He and the four great sages of the same clan held the Absolute Heaven Sword and walked out of the ground. They and Emperor Xiaoyao were in the sky and on the ground, sandwiching old Demon Shui and the great sage of the Feng clan in the middle, causing the two of them to fall into great despair. Was this Emperor Xiaoyao's intention? It would be difficult for them to escape today. However, as strong great saints, no one would give up their lives until the last moment. Let's fight! Old Demon Shui and the great sage of the Feng clan looked at each other and joined forces again. One of them conjured a blood sea, while the other conjured a destructive hurricane, which then condensed into a rotating blood-red arrow. Swoosh! The sharp arrow shot out immediately, shooting at the wall of the mansion not far away from them. Huang Daxing shouted. He and the great sage of the same clan wielded the Absolute Heaven Sword and slashed at the arrow. The sharp arrow was cut in half, but the remaining arrowhead did not lose its power. Instead, it shot out at a faster speed and instantly pierced through the sword, creating another gap. The two of them immediately flew toward the gap, making the last dash for their lives. 30,000 feet, 3,000 feet, 300 feet. They were close, and they were about to make it out. Huang Daxing's face revealed a trace of pity as he said, "Don't struggle." He and the great sage of the same clan held the Absolute Heaven Sword and stabbed at the two of them. No sword energy leaked out, and no power was displayed. They could only vaguely feel that the air was shaking violently. Then, the two of them who had just regathered their bodies immediately collapsed into a blood mist. It did not stop. The blood mist collapsed for the second time, turning into blood-red particles. Then, the Absolute Heaven Sword flew out and absorbed all the blood-red particles. Finally, the 8 great sages were all killed. Crack! A clear cracking sound came from inside the Absolute Heaven Sword, and a crack the width of a finger flashed. Kacha kacha! Cracking sounds came from inside the sword one after another. The impurities that had settled for nearly an epoch finally began to leak out. Strands of primordial energy slowly flowed out from the crack. When all the impurities were broken, the primordial energy would explode. Boom! Huang Daxing and his clansmen were overjoyed. They immediately stabbed the Absolute Heaven Sword into the ground and quickly left. There was too much primordial energy inside the Absolute Heaven Sword. When it exploded, it would create a powerful explosion that was enough to kill all those close by. Prepare the containers and collect the primordial energy, Huang Daxing said excitedly. He and his clansmen each took out 5 in total. They guarded the left, right, front, back, and top of the Absolute Heaven Sword to ensure that none of the energy would leak out. So much primordial energy is enough for our famed sword sacred race to produce a quasi-10,000 saint expert. The 4 clansmen revealed looks of great anticipation. Huang Daxing was already a peak existence among great saints. If he could obtain the primordial energy of an epoch, there was hope for him to become a quasi-10,000 saint. He might even become a true 10,000 saint expert. This was why they dared to kill the 8 great sages without the slightest scruple. Not only did they have Emperor Xiaoyao's secret support, but they also had the capital to not fear any great saints. Chapter 29-21. The materials used to forge the Absolute Heaven Sword came from the Sacred Mountain. All the resources they needed were provided by Emperor Xiaoyao. The famed Sword Sacred Clan's reward was the primordial energy released when the Absolute Heaven Sword was successfully forged. How could the famed Sword Sacred Clan give it to the other sacred clans for free? Rumble! The Absolute Heaven Sword began to emit a violent roar. Huang Dasheng immediately said, "Attention, it's about to begin." The other four great sages were excited. The famed Sword Sacred clan had waited for an entire era for this moment. The primordial energy was about to be born. Bang, bang, bang. Suddenly, the absolute heaven sword continued to explode like muffled thunder, one after another rumbling explosion after another. The commotion became more and more intense. Finally, with an earth-shattering explosion, all the impurities on the surface of the absolute heaven sword exploded at the same time. The violent explosion caused the entire sword-shaped mansion of the famed Sword Sacred clan to shake. The earth trembled, and the nearby gravel jumped. A sword-shaped beam of light shot up into the sky, shattering a large portion of the mansion's already broken hull. That beam of light contained an extremely terrifying power. It was the second most powerful thing Su Yu had ever seen. The first was the mortal ancestor's cauldron. The second was the terrifying beam of light in front of him. What kind of sword is this? Bai Shuem murmured, her heart filled with shock. She had never seen a divine artifact with such power in her life. If the Temple of Heaven was hit by this attack, it was certain that all the strong fighters in the temple would be annihilated by the sword. Even the Grand Palace Masters would not be able to help. They would definitely die. While she was in awe, Su was not idle. His gaze was fixed on the center of the explosion. He used his eyesight to the extreme, looking through the dust toward the center of the explosion. The remnant sword chi caused great pain to his eyes. There was even a trace of blood in his right eye. But Su Yu still endured the pain and looked through the dust, finally seeing the situation inside. A dark green long sword carved with 8 plum blossom marks was inserted into the deep pit of the explosion. The long sword was as beautiful as a peerless beauty, exuding a breathtaking aura. There was also a sense of arrogance and coldness that surpassed the world. It was as if it was not a sword, but a cold beauty in a green dress. So you could even feel that the sword was looking at him. Hiss! Suddenly, the dark green long sword turned slightly, and Su Yu groaned in pain. His eyes were burning with pain as his vision sank into darkness. Blood continuously flowed from his eyes. His eyes were blinded. Just being discovered by the dark green longsword was enough to easily blind him. If it was a normal person, they would have fallen into a state of panic. Only Su Yu forced himself to remain calm. Relying on the last scene that his eyes had locked onto, he threw the iron ball that Mo Hung had given him. Su Yu. Su Yu is Su's sword. Su Yu's sword. Visible to the naked eye, the absolute heaven sword was surrounded by a viscous energy that seemed to have solidified. It was scattered in the vicinity. Su Master. If it was given to a peak great sage, it might really be able to push his cultivation to the 10,000 sage level. Perhaps it was because Mo Heng's iron balls were more effective than the others. The 5 iron balls of Huang Dasheng and the others had yet to start rotating to absorb the primordial energy, while Su Yu's iron ball had already started rotating rapidly, crazily absorbing the primordial energy nearby. In just 5 short breaths of time, he had plundered the primordial energy required to pass the test. Bai Shui, who was beside Su Yu, was a step slower. She only followed Su Yu's lead and threw the metal ball a few breaths later. However, the primordial energy took up about 10% of it. At that moment, Huang Dasheng and the other 4's iron balls finally began to absorb the energy, competing with Su Yu and Bai Shui's 2 iron balls. 5 breaths later, the remaining primordial energy was sucked dry. Su Yu absorbed another 10%, and now he had 60% to himself. Bai Shui received another 10%, for a total of 20%. The 5 iron balls from Huang Dasheng and the others added up were only 80%. Before the dust settled, Su Yu and Bai Shui quickly retrieved the iron balls. However, they were facing great sage-level powerhouses, and one of them was even a top great sage existence. Although their movements were subtle, they were still noticed by Huang Dasheng. "Someone is causing trouble," Huang Dasheng shouted. His voice shook and set off endless sound waves that dispersed the smoke and dust, revealing his 5 iron balls. The 5 of them immediately retracted their hands, and their faces were filled with shock. "Why is it so little?" It's 5 times less than we expected. Impossible. There should be more than this amount of primordial energy. When Huang Dasheng found out that they only had 20% of the primordial energy they had expected, it was easy to imagine how he felt. You have a death wish. Huang Dasheng was furious. The primordial energy was his reverse scale. How could he allow outsiders to touch it? Oh no! Bai Shui exclaimed in surprise. She turned her head and realized that Su Yu was blind and could not tell which direction he was heading. Bai Shui's mind was in turmoil. There was no way they could escape with a blind man. Logic told her that she should abandon Su Yu and leave immediately. She could even push Su Yu out to distract the enemy. But somehow, she grabbed Su Yu's wrist and dashed toward an opening not far from them. Fortunately, the Feng clan's great sage and ancestor Shui had created an opening nearby before they died. Otherwise, they would not have been able to escape from the mansion of the Sacred Sword clan. In the blink of an eye, Bai Shui had brought Su Yu out of the Sacred Sword clan and were running aimlessly on the ancient battlefield. Huang Dasheng was shocked and angry. He recognized that the attackers were Su Yu and the palace master of the Heavenly Law Palace. The 8 great sages had obediently accepted their defeat and offered their swords to them. But these 2 juniors had stolen their painstaking efforts. This was a great irony and humiliation. Moreover, Bai Shui's identity was special. As the palace master of the Heavenly Law Palace, she had strong credibility. Once she leaked this information, the Sacred Sword clan would be attacked by the 8 great sages. That would be troublesome. Chase! Huang Dasheng ordered his 4 fellow clansmen to chase after them while he cautiously approached the center of the explosion. The Absolute Heaven Sword had been born. They could not just leave it here, could they? They had to preserve it and wait for Prince Xiaoyao to come in person and take it away. He was anxious about the other 80% of the primordial energy and whether the news would spread, so he was a little impatient. He took out a sword hilt that he had refined in advance and walked forward, trying to put the Absolute Heaven Sword into its scabbard. However, as he approached, something strange happened. The body of the Absolute Heaven Sword suddenly turned from emerald green to blood red. Traces of hostility and resentment were emitted from the body of the sword. 2 black eyeballs flashed on the body of the sword. In the resentment, Huang Dasheng could sense the aura of old Demon Shui and the Feng clan's great sage. Chapter 29-22. Oh no, let's retreat. Huang Dasheng had been forging weapons for many eras, so he had experienced many failures when forging weapons. He also knew that the more powerful a weapon was, the more dangerous it would be if it failed. The Absolute Heaven Sword in front of him was the most powerful weapon the Sword Saint clan had ever forged. If it failed, the consequences would be unimaginable. He roared as he retreated quickly. The 4 great sages were also very experienced. Before Huang Dasheng could warn them, they knew that things were not going well, so they had already retreated. Clang! The blood-red Absolute Heaven Sword flew out of the crater, emitting a sharp sword light. The pair of hidden black eyes reappeared and stared at Huang Dasheng. Huang Dasheng felt his hair stand on end, and a chill ran down his spine. When the Absolute Heaven Sword was still in its embryonic form, it could easily kill 8 great sages. Now that it was born, its power was more than 10 times stronger. Although he was a top-notch great sage, it was difficult for him to withstand the power of the Absolute Heaven Sword. Huang Dasheng was frightened when he saw the Absolute Heaven Sword staring at him. He roared, "Emperor, please save me." To be honest, the Absolute Heaven Sword had already turned into a beam of blood-red light, thrusting toward Huang Dasheng. Few people in the world could withstand this sword. Clang! Just as the sword light fell, the Absolute Heaven Sword in the hole launched a powerful attack. Half of the Emperor of Freedom's clone held the Emperor's ruler replica and descended from the sky. It drew a 9-colored light and accurately bombarded the sword light formed by the Absolute Heaven Sword. However, the shocking thing was that the Absolute Heaven Sword was not affected. The Absolute Heaven Sword's momentum was not affected at all. Instead, the 9-colored light that struck the Absolute Heaven Sword shattered. Prince Xiaoyao's clone was sent flying back along with the ruler. He slammed into the wall of the mansion and even created a huge hole. This showed how terrifying this attack was. The Absolute Heaven Sword seemed to have targeted Huang Dasheng, and it was full of resentment toward him. Huang Dasheng screamed in panic. He took out a jade-colored shield and put it behind him. Ding! An exhilarating scene appeared. The jade-colored shield successfully blocked the Absolute Heaven Sword. Huang Dasheng was happy that he had escaped death. The shield was a top-notch defensive Dao artifact that was refined by the ancestors of the Sword Saint clan. It was comparable to a quasi-divine artifact. For generations, it had been the inherited defensive magic treasure of the famous Sword Saint clan. In the entire 9-star civilization, there were very few defensive Dao treasures that could compare to it. However, before Huang Dasheng could rejoice, the shield made a cracking sound. A clear crack could be seen on the ground. Not good. Huang Dasheng took advantage of this brief moment of resistance and immediately fled to the exit. Crack! In the end, the jade shield was unable to hold on any longer and was completely shattered. The Absolute Heaven Sword carried a strong aura of resentment. It turned into a blood-red light and stabbed towards Huang Dasheng's back. Huang Dasheng was shocked to the extreme. His eyes were filled with despair. It's over. But perhaps it was not time for him to die yet. When the Absolute Heaven Sword was about to stab Huang Dasheng to death, the blood-red light on the sword's surface fluctuated unsteadily. From blood-red, it gradually returned to emerald green. The two colors were constantly changing within the Absolute Heaven Sword, as if they were fighting for control of the sword. In the end, the emerald green light showed a crushing momentum and once again occupied the entire body of the sword. Only the hilt of the sword was blood red. Emerald green represented the sword spirit of the Absolute Heaven Sword. It was born by absorbing the divine souls of 8 great sages. It was extremely noble. The remaining blood-red color should be the unwilling consciousnesses of the great sages of the Feng clan and Old Demon Shui. Because there was a flaw in the forging process of the Absolute Heaven Sword, the remaining consciousnesses of the two had a chance to exist. The sword spirit could not destroy the remaining consciousnesses, and the consciousnesses could no longer control the Absolute Heaven Sword. However, their existence made everyone who wanted to control the Absolute Heaven Sword flinch. Anyone who held the blood-red hilt would definitely be attacked by the remaining consciousnesses. They would lose their rationality and be controlled by them. Clang! The Absolute Heaven Sword that could be controlled stabbed into the ground and returned to silence. Huang Dasheng and the others, who were still in shock, were panting heavily. They still had not recovered from the dangerous situation just now. It was too dangerous. He was so close to dying in the hands of the Absolute Heaven Sword. Fortunately, the sword spirit was strong enough. After a while, Huang Dasheng and the other great sages of the Feng clan confirmed that the Absolute Heaven Sword had completely stabilized. They then took out the sword sheath and carefully sheathed it. However, they did not dare to touch the hilt of the Absolute Heaven Sword. Your Excellency, I'll leave the remaining consciousnesses in the sword to you. Huang Dasheng offered the Absolute Heaven Sword with both hands and handed it to the Emperor's clone. The latter nodded slightly. Although it's a little troublesome, it won't be a problem to get rid of the remaining consciousnesses. You all did well, the unfettered Emperor's clone praised. Huang Dasheng heaved a sigh of relief. It was great that the Emperor did not blame them. Next, they just had to catch the few thieves who stole their primordial energy. I'll take my leave first. The unfettered Emperor's clone held the Absolute Heaven Sword and soared into the sky, returning to the Holy Mountain. However, just as he was about to leave through the gap, a black shadow suddenly emerged from the ground and ignited the unfettered Emperor's clone. Why is this thing released? In just an instant, the unfettered Emperor's clone was burned. The half of his body that he had painstakingly pieced together was immediately destroyed. He cried out in pain, and his voice was filled with great fear. His original body might not be afraid of this fire, but he was only a clone now, and more than half of it was damaged. The clone made a prompt decision and raised the Emperor's ruler, slashing at his lower body. Crack! The lower body that was on fire was immediately abandoned. The upper body held the absolute heaven sword and rushed out quickly. However, not long after he rushed out, the black shadow chased after him again. In the endless void, only the unfettered emperor's angry roar could be heard, and then his voice gradually calmed down. All that was left was some burnt residue that fell to the ground with a clatter. The pupils of the Mingjian Saint tribes, people shrank to the extreme. That black shadow, could it be? Huang Daxing's whole body trembled, and he was even more terrified than when he faced the absolute heaven sword. Looking at the falling ashes, he immediately shouted, "All the people of the Mingjian Saint tribe, evacuate!" Immediately, the absolute heaven sword chased after Huang Daxing because it contained the remnant consciousnesses of the Feng clan's great sage and old blood demon. It would only harm Huang Daxing and the other great sages. However, that black shadow was different. It had been suppressed by the Mingjian Saint tribe for several eras, and it had long been full of resentment toward them. Now that it was free, the first thing it would do was to destroy the Mingjian Saint tribe. Hearing this, the people of the Mingjian Saint tribe fled, panic on their faces. The birth of the absolute heaven sword was really full of troubles. First, the absolute heaven sword failed and almost killed Huang Daxing. Now, it released that trace of terrifying tribulation fire. Huang Daxing and the other great sages abandoned their people and fled first. In a corner of the mansion, Emo Hung supported his son, whose blood essence had been released, and hid in a secret room that he had prepared for a long time. That secret room was personally built by him, and it was indestructible. The refining process lasted half of his life, and the materials used were secretly saved from the refining process. This was because he had long expected that there would be chaos when the absolute heaven sword was born. Chapter 29-23. He closed the door of his secret chamber and put his son down. He sighed and said, "On one side is the peerless, ominous sword, and on the other side is the apocalyptic tribulation fire. The Sacred Sword clan has been too smooth these past few years, and they have forgotten themselves. In the past, the famed Sword Sacred clan had always acted cautiously to ensure that nothing would go wrong. However, in order to refine the absolute heaven sword, he did not hesitate to suppress a trace of human-shaped tribulation fire. He was too confident in the process of forging the absolute heaven sword. During this period, he had pointed out the flaws and shortcomings in the forging process, but the famous Sword Sacred clan did not believe him. In the end, he almost ended up being devoured by the absolute heaven sword. "Father, did you make this?" Ada came to his senses and looked around the secret room in shock. He had grown up in the famed Sword Sacred clan and had seen countless Tao artifacts. However, he had never seen such an exquisite secret room before. Its grade was probably much higher than that of Great Sage Huang and the other great sages of the family. Now that things had come to this, Emo Hung could no longer conceal it. He nodded slightly and said, "Yes." Ada murmured, "So father has been hiding his artifact forging skills all along." A trace of pride appeared on Emo Heng's face, and his eyes were filled with anticipation. "I hope my son will be proud of me." However, the response he received was something that Emo Hung did not expect. "Why are you hiding it?" Ada clenched his fist. "If you tell the 5 great sages, they will definitely be shocked by your talent and put you in an important position. You will become the most famous refiner in the Sacred Sword clan, and I will be the son of a refiner. I will not be called the son of a good-for-nothing, nor will I be looked down upon by others, nor will I be ostracized by my clan. Why? Why did you make me suffer so much?" What Emo Hung received was not pride, but censure. He felt a stabbing pain in his heart. His son, who had been mentally suppressed since he was young, had a very extreme mentality. He wanted to curry favor with the famed Sword Sacred clan, gain their recognition and attention, and get rid of his lowly status. "Child, I was deceived by the famed Sword Sacred clan all those years ago and was forcefully enslaved. Let me ask you, how could I be willing to serve them?" Emo Hung spoke of his suffering. Back then, He had fallen in love with a female member of the Sword Sacred clan. She had invited him here, saying that she wanted to bring him to meet her father to discuss the marriage. It was only after he arrived that he realized that it was all a scam crafted by the female clansman. As soon as he arrived, he was enslaved and became a tool for the famed Sword Sacred clan to forge artifacts. And he wasn't the only one who had a similar experience. There were also other artificers who had been tricked by the Sword Sacred tribe's female clansmen. However, the special thing was that the female tribesman accidentally gave birth to his child, Ada. Later on, when the female clansman went out to deceive others, she was exposed and killed. Therefore, Mo Hung raised the child alone. Unexpectedly, Ada's mentality was completely distorted by his childhood. Father, why are you still brooding over the past? Let's let bygones be bygones. What we should do now is demonstrate our worth and fight for the Sacred Sword Clan's recognition. Only then will we have a good life, Ada said longingly. There's still time. Let's contact the 5 great saints and get them to bring our clansmen here to seek refuge. That way, we'll owe the Sword Sacred race a debt of gratitude. Once we survive this, we'll become the Sword Sacred race's benefactors. Ada stood up and hobbled towards the door of the secret room. Mo Hung was disappointed. Yes, this was his son. He had been completely nurtured into a loyal and devoted slave by the famed Sword Sacred clan. From the body to the heart, everything was enslaved. Child, it's already too late, Mo Hung sighed. Right now, the human-shaped tribulation fire should have returned and was ready to kill in all directions. The famed Sword Sacred clan's clansmen would not be able to escape annihilation. Father, the more dangerous it is, the more valuable our rescue will be, Ada said agitatedly and opened the door of the secret room again. Through the crack, he could see some clansmen fleeing in panic from afar. Many of them were people who had looked down on him before. If they were given a place to hide now, they would definitely not dare to look down on him in the future, right? He opened his mouth and was about to shout when Mo Hung closed the door of the secret room again. His eyes revealed undisguised disappointment. A person must have a backbone. Not only did he not resent the way the famed Sword Sacred clan treated him and his father, he actually wanted to rescue them and gain their recognition. How lowly must he be to have such a thought? Father, if you want to be a wimp for the rest of your life, that's your business, but I don't want to. Ada pushed Mo Hung away with a face full of anger. Now is my chance to make a contribution. No one can stop me. Mo Hung staggered, his heart in pain. Was it not good to watch the famed Sword Sacred clan be destroyed? Why must he be their slave? Then I'll leave this secret room to you. It will be a turning point in your life. The reason why Mo Hung stayed was because he cared about this flesh and blood of his. However, his performance was too disappointing. He took a step forward and walked out of the secret room. Ada's heart was in a mess. Although his father was a wimp, he had relied on him all these years. He never thought that there would be a day when his father would leave him. Father, are you going to leave me behind? I'm your son. Ada did not dare to leave the secret room and loudly criticized. Mo Hung sighed. It's true that you are my son, but you are not young anymore. You should have been independent long ago. In the future, take care of yourself. After saying that, his figure flashed, and he displayed his powerful cultivation and immediately left. Ada chased after him, but the sky suddenly turned pitch black. Boundless black flames descended like a heavenly tribulation. Ada was so frightened that he immediately retreated and shouted to the nearby, famed Sword Sacred clan clansmen, "Come quickly, there's a secret room here." The famed Sword Sacred clan clansmen, who were busy running for their lives, rushed over when they heard that. In the blink of an eye, over 100 people, all of them core members of the clan, entered the secret room. Just as they dodged in, the black tribulation flames descended from the sky. Ada immediately closed the door. Explosions and screams could be heard outside. One could imagine that the outside had fallen into a sea of flames. However, apart from the temperature rising slightly in this secret room, there was actually nothing wrong with it. An entire day passed. The commotion outside gradually calmed down, and they tried to open a crack in the secret room. Unexpectedly, a wisp of remnant tribulation flames swept in and burned two nearby ancient sages to ashes on the spot. This scene gave everyone a fright, and they immediately closed the door. It was not until an entire month later, when the footsteps of animals came from outside, that they opened the door to the secret room. What entered their eyes was a scene that they would never forget for the rest of their lives. The huge, sword-shaped residence of the famed sword-sacred clan had already disappeared. All that was left was an incomparably pitch-black circular pit and countless ashes. The former building had already been reduced to ashes. Only a few demonic beasts were left in the ruins, searching for food. The rest are all dead, an ancient sage said in a daze. Looking at the scene back then, most of the clansmen had not escaped the range of the tribulation flames. Only 5 great sages had escaped first. The famed sword-sacred clan had almost been exterminated. Chapter 29-24. Fortunately, the elites of the clan were still alive. With them around, it was only a matter of time before they rebuilt the famed sword-sacred clan. Well done. As the clan master, the ancient sage patted Ada's shoulder and praised. Thanks to you, the famed sword-sacred clan was able to avoid total annihilation. Your contribution cannot go unnoticed. Ada was overjoyed. For so many years, he had been living at the bottom of the famed sword-sacred clan and was looked down upon by everyone. He did not expect to be praised by the high and mighty clan master today. One had to know that in the past, he could not even meet the clan master. I'll consider giving you a reward. The clan master's eyes revealed an unfathomable look. Ada immediately knelt down in fear and trepidation. I'm a member of the famed sword-sacred clan. Everything I've done is what I should do. I dare not ask for a reward. You must accept my reward. The clan master's eyes became even more profound. Ada was overjoyed. His decision was indeed correct. Only by providing help in times of need would he be rewarded generously. He lowered his head and said embarrassedly, "This group does not dare to disobey the clan master's orders." The clan master said indifferently. Suddenly, he stretched out his palm and patted Ada's chest. A ball of flames ignited in his palm, immediately burning on Ada's chest. It caused an excruciating pain on his forehead. Ada screamed due to the pain and wanted to break free. But the 2 young clansmen behind him had ferocious sneers on their faces. They grabbed Ada and pressed him to the ground, allowing the fire to burn his chest. The extremely cruel process lasted for half a cup of tea's time. Ada felt that he had suffered unprecedented torture in his life. The persecution he had suffered in the past was not even a fraction of this. He screamed incessantly. In the end, his limbs twitched in pain. He did not even have the strength to scream. He lay on the ground like a dead pig, panting weakly. A slave mark appeared on his chest. But what was different from a normal slave mark was that it was the same as M.O. Hang's. Did you hear that just now? This bastard actually called himself a member of our famed sword-sacred clan. A young member of the famed sword-sacred clan scornfully stepped on Ada's butt and sneered. What a surprise. We usually treat him like a beast, but at the critical moment, he actually saved us. Don't you think it's strange? Who asked him to be born from that good-for-nothing M.O. Hung? He's probably born with low intelligence. Did you see that just now? He really thought that we were going to reward him. He was so excited. Stupid pig. The familiar disdain. No, it was even more serious than before, drowned Ada like a terrible tide. He didn't understand. He had clearly helped them. So why didn't they acknowledge him? Why? This was because people only interacted with existences of equal status. Would a person become friends with a beast without any dignity? Obviously not. Ada belittled himself. It would be strange if the noble sword-sacred clan would treat him as one of their own. The patriarch stared at the slave mark on M.O. Hang's chest and sneered. M.O. Hung, it turns out that you've been hiding your strength all along. You've even deceived the 5 great sages in the family. However, a slave for a day is a slave for life. Don't even think about escaping the control of the famous sword-sacred clan. It turned out that after learning that this secret room was refined by M.O. Hung, the patriarch realized that something was amiss. Mo Hung had been hiding his true strength all this time. Now that the famous Sword Sacred clan had 1,000 things to do, they couldn't afford to lose a refining genius like Mo Hung. Catching him back was not secondary to recovering the lost primordial energy. He didn't leave a slave mark on Ada. A trash like Ada was not worthy of him personally using the mark. What he did was to determine the other party's position through the bloodline relationship between Ada and Mo Hung. Look after him. The patriarch casually produced a long chain and locked Ade up like a dog. Then he went to find the 5 great sages. After the tribulation, fire destroyed the famous Sword Sacred clan. It went to chase after the 5 great sages. It was unknown whether they were still alive. Those 5 great sages were the most important core of the famous Sword Sacred clan. If they died, the famous Sword Sacred clan would recuperate and recover. The traces left behind by the tribulation fire were very obvious. Wherever it passed, the world was scorched. Following the scorched traces, the patriarch found a place that the famous Sword Sacred clan was most unwilling to step into: the Black Abyss. Judging from the traces, the tribulation fire had chased into the Black Abyss. The 5 great sages must have also stepped into it. But what he didn't know was that 2 more people had also hidden in the Black Abyss. Deep in the Black Abyss, on a cliff, Bai Shui hugged Suyu tightly in her arms, secretly using her energy to heal his eyes. "You're going too far, aren't you?" Bai Shui looked at Suyu's blind eyes, puzzled. Suyu's eyes were still tingling with pain. The sharp sword energy of the absolute heaven sword was still reverberating in his eyes. As long as the sword energy was not extinguished, any treatment from Bai Shui would be useless. "Don't waste your energy. I'll do it myself," Suyu said calmly. He had lost his sight once before, so this time he was very calm. Even if he couldn't use his eyes, he could still use his soul eyes to see through everything. "You'd better stay away from me." Suyu slowly opened his eyes. Bai Shui was startled. "What?" Suyu did not speak. His eyes, which had lost focus, opened, and there was a pale color in the depths of his pupils. That was the state of his soul eyes. Once it was activated, everything in the world could be seen through, including Bai Shui in front of Suyu. Her luxurious dress was completely seen through. Her entire body was naked in front of Suyu, and he could see everything clearly. When his gaze swept past her chest, he could not help but be surprised. "It's so big." When Bai Shui was naked, it was only the size of a steamed bun. It could be imagined that Bai Shui had hidden herself. What Suyu saw was only the surface. The seemingly petite Bai Shui actually had another body. Finally, Bai Shui sensed something and immediately covered her chest. Why are your eyes so perverted?" Suyu averted his gaze and calmly said, "I told you to stay away from me." "Shameless, despicable, perverted, dirty," Bai Shui muttered, the blush on her face lingering. In the past, it had been a fake body, so Suyu had seen it. But what he had just seen was her real body. "Sure." Suyu suddenly gestured for her to keep quiet, pointing deep into the Black Abyss. "Don't speak." Bai Shui covered her chest, looking down into the Black Abyss. She did not see any movement for a long time. "You're trying to be mysterious again," she said. Before she could finish, Bai Shui finally heard something. Lowering her head to take a closer look, she discovered that black skeletons were surging out of the Black Abyss like a tidal wave. There were all sorts of skeletons, but all of them were corpses that had died on the battlefield. For some reason, they had left the Black Abyss en masse and were climbing upwards. From their speed, they seemed to be in a panic. Chapter 29-25. Bai Shui panicked. She immediately prepared to flee upwards to avoid encountering the skeleton army. However, Suyu pulled him back and said, "Don't be impatient. The skeletons had no murderous intent. They were just moving." Indeed, the army of skeletons, like a black tide, quickly climbed up the cliff. When they encountered the 2 of them, they did not hesitate. They all went around them and fled in a panic. After half an incense stick of time, the uncountable black tide army had all retreated. The Black Abyss had returned to its previous deathly stillness. But the more it was so, the more they felt apprehensive. It was as if there was a terrifying existence staring at them from within the black abyss. So you also felt apprehensive. We should not stay here for long. It was not advisable to go deeper into the black abyss. But right at this moment, an incomparably violent fluctuation came from above their heads. A golden spear turned into a golden stream of light and fiercely shot towards where the two of them were. The light was even more powerful than Bai Shui, an ancient saint. It was almost at the level of a great saint. By the time the two of them reacted, it was too late to escape. In the blink of an eye, Suyu raised his hand and grabbed the golden spear with the help of Heavenly Prince Mirrorflower's powerful body. Creak, creak, creak. The golden spear created a purple flame in his palm, drawing blood from the Heavenly Prince. But its speed was greatly reduced. Suyu and Bai Shui could easily dodge it. Puff! The golden spear pierced through Suyu's black robe, nailing him to the cliff. The owner of the spear let out a surprised sound. Who are you? You managed to withstand my attack. The newcomer was the master of the Sword Saint tribe, a being only one step away from becoming a great saint. In terms of combat power, he was not much weaker than a real great saint. When he descended, he had noticed the abnormality of the black tide of skeletons. They had all gone around a certain area. So he concluded that there might be someone there and tried to shoot out a spear. He did not expect them to withstand it. It's you. When they got closer, the master suddenly realized. Where's the primordial energy? Hand it over. Bai Shui gritted her teeth, cursing her bad luck. She had barely escaped the pursuit of 5 great sages, but now she was blocked by the patriarch. That primal energy was not easy to obtain. Should he try to resist? Don't try to rely on luck. When you first arrived, I already knew that there was a problem with your identities. The patriarch said indifferently, since I dared to let you in, I naturally have the confidence to make you stay. With a wave of his hand, a small rotating cauldron appeared in his palm. Bai Shui was unfamiliar with the small cauldron, but Suyu was very familiar with it. Mortal life cauldron? Suyu muttered softly. Back then, the human ancestor used the mortal life cauldron to leave behind a gigantic hole in the ancient battlefield, which became the black abyss of today. It would be strange if the famed sword sacred race wasn't envious. They had painstakingly refined the mortal life cauldron replica for many years. Hey, you do have a good eye, the clan master said in surprise. One of you is the temple master of the Temple of Heaven, and the other is holding a fake invitation letter. This combination is really interesting. When Suyu first came in, the invitation letter had not been seen through, but there were only so many invitations sent out. In the end, there was one extra invitation letter. Even an idiot from the famed Sword Sacred clan would know that one of the invitations was fake. In comparison, Suyu, who was beside Bai Shui, was the most suspicious. But they did not make a move, planning to wait for the absolute heaven sword to appear and kill them all. But Suyu and Bai Shui's vitality was exceptionally strong. Not only did they not die, but they also snatched away a large portion of the primal energy. Bai Shui's heart sank. She had still been recognized. This primal energy was a little tricky. If the famed Sword Sacred clan went to the Temple of Heaven to cause trouble in the future, the Temple of Heaven would not be able to resist. Hand over the primal energy. The clan master approached step by step, emitting a tyrannical aura. Suyu grabbed the golden spear on his shoulder and decisively pulled Bai Shui into the depths of the black abyss. You want to leave? The clan master immediately gave chase. But not long after, the clan master abruptly stopped in his tracks. He had felt a suction force from the black abyss. It was as if a huge vortex of air was wreaking havoc below. Suyu and Bai Shui had no choice but to stop as well, their expressions grave. Suyu's transparent eyes could see even more clearly. What vortex was that? It was clearly a gigantic skeletal demonic beast. It was opening its mouth wide, crazily swallowing the remaining skeletons on the cliff. After swallowing them, the size of the skeletal demonic beast would increase by a notch. Suyu's scalp went numb. Anything could exist in the black abyss. His heart sank. There really was a wolf in front and a tiger behind. The clan master was also extremely fearful. Hand over the primal energy to me, and I can promise to let you live. If Su Yu and the others were sucked in, the consequences would be dire. However, it was absolutely impossible for him to let them live. What happened in the famed Sword Sacred clan could not be revealed to the outside world. As he spoke, he approached step by step. Su Yu grabbed by Shui, multitasking. He observed the movements of the giant demonic beast below while guarding against the famed Sword Sacred clan master. Both were closing in on them, especially the giant demonic beast. After noticing the three of them, it immediately gave up on the other skeletons and charged toward them. When it was 100,000 zhang away from them, a bolt of purple lightning suddenly shot out from the mouth of the demonic beast. The lightning was extremely fast. Even Su Yu's transparent eyes could not capture it, but his heart was alarmed, and he felt a strong sense of danger. Without hesitation, he grabbed by Shui and dodged to the side. The famed Sword Sacred clan master could not see what was happening within the Black Abyss. But seeing Su Yu and the others suddenly dodge, he knew something was wrong and dodged as well. But he was still a step too late. A purple snake like withered vines wrapped around the clan master's ankle, then fiercely pulled downwards. Even someone as strong as the clan master could not resist and was immediately pulled into the Black Abyss. No! At the critical moment, the clan master felt a strong desire to live, throwing out the mortal cauldron. Light shot out from within the cauldron, enveloping Su Yu and Bai Shui. The two of them were immediately pulled into the replica mortal cauldron by the light. Su Yu and Bai Shui had no choice but to resist, trying to free themselves from the mortal cauldron. Thus, they barely managed to slow down the clan master's fall. Just as he thought he had escaped death, the skeleton demonic beast below suddenly exerted its strength, instantly dragging the clan master down. Su Yu and Bai Shui were also dragged down, falling rapidly. Seeing that they were about to be swallowed along with the clan master, Su Yu decisively shot out a shred of holy body power, cutting off the light that was dragging them down. Ding! At the critical moment, they finally broke free. They could hear the clan master's violent screams coming from the mouth of the skeleton demonic beast below. But Su Yu and Bai Shui were not out of danger. They were less than 10,000 zhang away from the skeleton demonic beast. Chapter 29-26. If they retreated now, the skeleton demonic beast would use its tongue, and they would not have any time to react. In a split second, Su Yu did not retreat. He grabbed Bai Shui and ran in the opposite direction. Not only did he not retreat, but he charged toward the Black Abyss. They crossed 1,000 feet in an instant. The skeleton demonic beast extended its tongue, wanting to wrap around Su Yu and Bai Shui, but they were already behind it. Its tongue lost its agility and brushed past Su Yu's shoulder, unable to wrap around Su Yu in time. Taking this opportunity, Su Yu and Bai Shui leaped into the depths of the Black Abyss. Creak! The skeleton demonic beast let out a roar, turning to chase after Su Yu and Bai Shui. The two of them could only brace themselves as they headed deeper into the Black Abyss. The closer they got, the more they felt the threat within the depths of the Black Abyss. But the skeleton demonic beast was hot on their heels, and they had no choice but to continue deeper. Half a day later, the chase did not stop. What made Su Yu's heart palpitate was that the deeper they went, the more ferocious skeletons there were. Even they were moving further and further away from the abyss, as if they were seriously shocked. They even met skeletons that were stronger than the skeleton demonic beast. Everything told them that there was a great danger at the bottom of the abyss. In the end, even the skeleton demonic beast that had been chasing them all this time finally stopped. Its burning eyes flickered with a hint of fear. After letting out a cry of dissatisfaction, it decisively turned and fled the abyss. Su Yu and Bai Shui immediately stopped. Their surroundings could no longer be described as dark. They could not see anything around them, as if they were in a black swamp. Even Su Yu's transparent eyes could not see clearly what was going on at the bottom of the abyss. Let's leave quickly. Bai Shui unknowingly grabbed Su Yu's sleeve, her heart filled with worry. Su Yu did not dare stay any longer. As he was about to leave, he suddenly saw a ball of emerald light flash past the bottom of the abyss. That is, Su Yu was shocked. Even though it had only been a flash, he had seen it clearly. The absolute heaven sword. Wasn't that sword successfully refined by the famous sword sacred race and obtained? Why would it appear in the abyss? As Suyu recalled the frightening power of the sword, his heart thumped wildly. This sword was said to have been forged by the Xiaoyao emperor. All the materials used were unknown materials from the sacred mountain, and the human-shaped tribulation fire and other lofty flames were used. It took an entire era's worth of effort to forge this sword. Suyu had witnessed its power with his own eyes. Even a great sage expert was killed by a single slash. There was no way to resist it. In the entire nine-star civilization, apart from the primal Chaos Heavens clan, no one could contend against them. If he could get his hands on this sword, so what if he had to face the goddess race alone? You go first. Suyu's eyes flickered. I saw the absolute heaven sword. He didn't hide anything. If White Snow was willing to take the risk, he wouldn't mind sharing the sword with her. If they were unwilling to take the risk, he wouldn't make things difficult for them. Absolute heaven sword. Bai Shui's eyes burned with passion, but when she looked at the dark abyss that she couldn't even see through, she instinctively felt fear. After struggling for a long time, he sighed and said, I'm not going. Moreover, I advise you not to go. The absolute heaven sword is not something we can control. The Black Abyss was extremely dangerous. So what if he obtained the absolute heaven sword? Did they have the right to hold such a sword in their hands? They couldn't withstand the wrath of the Saint Mountain's emperor. I've made up my mind. Suyu's eyes flickered. He wasn't greedy for the absolute heaven sword, but there were too many reasons for him to master even greater power and artifacts. Above him were the people who trusted him. Below him were Xia Jingyu, Qin Xiener, Xie Xiaoye, and other important people in his life. Even if it was risky, he had to get the absolute heaven sword. Bai Shui looked deeply at Suyu and sighed. All right, you're on your own. Let's part ways here. This place was filled with incomparably dangerous skeletons. She couldn't wait for Suyu nearby. Go, Suyu said lightly. Both sides had gotten their hands on the primordial energy. It was time to bid farewell to each other. Take care. With that, Bai Shui leaped away. Not long after, she remembered something. You should return the seal of the Heavenly Law Palace to me. But when she looked back, she found that Suyu had already entered the Black Abyss. The veins on Bai Shui's forehead throbbed. Is this guy going to reincarnate? Roar. Suddenly, the threatening sounds of the skeletons could be heard. Bai Shui's heart tightened, and she immediately left. She couldn't help but worry. This guy, please don't use the seal of the Heavenly Law Palace. The seal of the Heavenly Law Palace of the aristocratic families was something that could only be found by chance. It could never fall into the hands of a wanderer. But Suyu was so powerful, he couldn't be a wanderer, right? Suyu plunged into the deepest part of the Black Abyss. Soon he felt something solid beneath his feet. He had reached the bottom of the Black Abyss. The ground here was boiling with a layer of evil energy. The evil energy was so deep that it even began to seep into Tianzi Jinghua's body. Suyu's heart trembled. His holy body power surged out, forcing the evil energy out of his body. Not only that, but he also set up a Yuan realm, holy body power, and chaotic force around him. The three powers combined to form a defense. Only after ensuring his personal safety did he have the leisure to observe the situation outside. Ding ding. The crisp sound of a sword fell into his ears. Suyu immediately walked over cautiously. When he was 10,000 feet away, he finally managed to see something with his transparent eye. He saw 5 figures fighting with the absolute heaven sword. The absolute heaven sword had been sheathed, so its power was greatly reduced. That was how the 5 figures were able to compete with it. Suyu walked forward again. Suddenly, he stepped on a soft protrusion under his feet and stiffened slightly. He looked down and found that it was just a soft stone. He didn't care and continued to move forward. After 10,000 feet, he finally saw the scene clearly. However, what caused him to suck in a breath of cold air was that the 5 figures were none other than the 5 great sages of the Sword Saint clan. Each of the 5 great sages had a long chain wrapped around their necks. Even the body of the absolute heaven sword was bound by a chain. The 6 chains bound them, and they were like puppets, fighting and killing each other. This could it be? Suyu looked at the source of the 6 chains and found that the end of the chains was embedded in a mountain. Just as Suyu was surprised, the mountain moved, and in the pitch-black sky of the abyss, 2 blood-red cracks appeared at the same time. The cracks grew larger and larger, and finally opened into 2 spheres. In the center of the sphere, there was a golden round hole. It moved slightly and aimed at Suyu. Chapter 29-27. Could it be that he had stepped on Gulp? The blood moon in the darkness began to turn and stare at Suyu. In the darkness, there seemed to be something slowly approaching. At the critical moment, Suyu displayed the 8 great Yuan realm, condensing it into a realm torch, forcibly illuminating the surroundings. The light only lasted for a moment before it was swallowed up by the darkness again. But in an instant, Suyu had already seen everything in front of him. His pupils shrank to the size of a needle. In the moment of the light, he saw a huge golden skeleton. It sat cross-legged in the black abyss, its hands flat on its knees. A huge head was looking down at Suyu. What Suyu had stepped on just now was the thumb of its foot. That was not the only terrifying thing. He saw with his own eyes that the chains on the 5 great saints and the absolute heaven sword were all wrapped around the giant's wrist. In other words, it was the golden skeleton that imprisoned them. Thinking of this, Suyu's scalp went numb. He had seen the peerless power of the absolute heaven sword with his own eyes. But even the powerful absolute heaven sword had been captured alive. Moreover, it was forced to be controlled by the 5 great saints, like a puppet performing for the golden skeleton. Suyu suddenly remembered an ancient rumor. Every time the moon was full, there would be a huge towering battle shadow projected between heaven and earth from the black abyss. Wherever it was projected, everything would wither and not even a blade of grass would grow. Could it be that the owner of that enormous figure was this golden puppet? At this moment, the 2 blood moon-like eyes slowly approached. He could faintly hear the movement caused by the huge body moving. Suyu's heart quivered. He finally understood why the creatures in the black abyss were fleeing at all costs. That was because this extremely ancient and terrifying golden skeleton had awakened. Suyu did not move recklessly. The 5 great saints and the absolute heaven sword were imprisoned as puppets. His resistance would only be futile, and it would also trigger dangerous actions from the golden skeleton. The 2 blood moons were getting closer and closer. Finally, it was only 100 feet away from Suyu. In the blood mist, Suyu could vaguely see the face of the golden skeleton. "You, holy body." The golden skeleton let out an ancient and boundless voice. Above its head, an extremely old and decaying oil lamp slowly appeared. Suyu's heart skipped a beat. Holy body, oil lamp? It was an oil lamp that only a sacred body could possess. However, the golden skeleton's oil lamp was much bigger and more complicated than Suyu's. It was conceivable that when he was at his peak, his divine body had reached a terrifying level, and he had received an endless amount of faith. The reason for his death was self-evident, destroyed by the Son of Heaven. However, Suyu did not sense any kindness from this fallen saint body. Instead, those blood-red eyes revealed a trace of coldness that made Suyu's hair stand on end. "Give me your body." As expected, the golden skeleton spoke in a hoarse voice. It then raised its golden finger and pointed at Suyu's body. Chila, his black robe, was torn apart, revealing his true appearance. Mirror Flower Heaven's son. What? The 5 great sages and the ultimate heaven sword were all shocked. The person who stole their energy was actually Heavenly Prince Mirrorflower? How could that be? Heavenly Prince Mirrorflower was still in the process of resurrection, and Heavenly Prince Xiao Yao was in charge of the whole process. How could he let Heavenly Prince Mirrorflower go looking for energy by himself? Moreover, the absolute heaven sword was forged for Heavenly Prince Mirrorflower. It was a sword prepared for her. Why did Heavenly Prince Mirrorflower make such a big fuss about the birth of the absolute heaven sword? Everything made them understand that things were not as simple as they had imagined. The golden skeleton's finger should have crushed Suyu to the ground. However, when it noticed Suyu's body, it withdrew its golden finger instinctively. Its blood-red eyes quickly distanced themselves from Su Yu, revealing the fear that came from the depths of its soul. It seemed that it still remembered the fragmented memories of its death. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Su Yu did not retreat. Instead, he slowly walked towards the golden skeleton. Creak! The golden skeleton's fear deepened. Its two blood-red eyes kept trembling, and its huge body could not help but stand up. It strode deeper into the black abyss to escape. So much so that the 5 great sages and the ultimate heaven sword had no time to care about them. They left them where they were, not daring to pay any attention to them. The 5 great sages felt as if they had been pardoned. They tried their best to break free from the chains on their bodies. Su Yu's eyes flashed. He flew to the front of the ultimate heaven sword and grasped the scabbard. He noticed that the hilt of the ultimate heaven sword had a strange blood-red color. He felt that something was wrong, so he did not touch it. "Stop!" Huang Dashing shouted sternly as he untied the chains. "Fake mirror flower heaven, do you think you can fool us?" The other 4 great saint clansmen had the same attitude. They were the ones who had communicated with Xiaoyao heaven, so they understood mirror flower heaven's current situation best. The mirror flower heaven in front of them was not her real self. Su Yu was secretly annoyed. He shouted in a low voice, "Shuh, do you want to die?" Were they afraid that the golden skeleton could not hear such a loud noise? The 5 great sages realized this. They untied the chains and hurriedly prepared to intercept Su Yu. Su Yu came and went freely. He grabbed the ultimate heaven sword and immediately fled to the top of the black abyss. However, he had only taken a few steps when the huge footsteps that had disappeared reappeared. Thump! Su Yu and the 5 great sages felt their hearts skip a beat. The golden skeleton had returned. It had a certain level of intelligence. From the words of Huang Dasheng and the others, Su Yu's body of mirror flower heaven was not the one it was afraid of. Su Yu had no time to argue with them. He used all the strength he could use to run all the way up. Crack! 5 consecutive sounds of chains breaking could be heard. The 5 great sages broke free one after another, fleeing outwards in terror. Before this, they had been forced to flee into the abyss by the disastrous fire. The disastrous fire had a premonition that there was something dangerous in the black abyss. Seeing that the situation was not good, it had left first. However, by the time they wanted to leave, it was too late. This terrifying golden skeleton had suppressed all of them with just a little finger. Even the ultimate heaven sword, which had fallen into the black abyss, was not spared. They were all captured. If they did not escape now, they would be trapped in the black abyss for the rest of their lives. There was no guarantee that they would be eaten by the skeleton at any time. Roar! From afar, the loud roar of the golden skeleton could be heard. The 5 great sages were horrified as they ran all the way. They had only run for a cup of tea's time when the entire black abyss began to tremble. The 4 walls of the black abyss shook violently as if there was an earthquake. Su Yu looked down through his soul eyes, and his pupils constricted. The golden skeleton was like a human ape, climbing the cliff of the black abyss and catching up with them at an astonishing speed. It would not be long before the golden skeleton caught up and captured them again. There was no time for all of them to escape. Chapter 29-28. Since this sword was forged for Emperor Xiaoyao, could Emperor Mirrorflower's body control it as well? Seeing that the golden skeleton was about to catch up to him, Su Yu decisively grabbed the hilt of his sword. The blood-red hilt of the sword was where the Feng clan's sacred ancestor and old demon blood's resentment resided. Upon contact, their grievances immediately rushed into Su Yu's soul, trying to control it and indirectly control the absolute heaven sword. Without batting an eyelid, Su Yu opened the soul realm and condensed a layer of soul coat on the surface of his soul. The two's resentment attacked the outer layer of the soul and were immediately repelled. They were indeed great saints when they were alive, but now they were just remnant souls. Hence, they posed no threat to Su Yu, who had mastered the soul domain. However, it would cause some trouble and affect him from activating the absolute heaven sword. If you want to take revenge, then don't try to affect me. Su Yu's voice reverberated in their souls, ensuring that their remnant souls could hear him. The Feng clan's divine ancestor, an old demon, Shui, stopped their attacks and listened to Su Yu's voice. If this stalemate continues, I will die in the hands of the golden skeletons, but you will also be buried in the black abyss forever, never to see the light of day again. Help me now, and I will help you deal with your enemies in the future. Maybe I can even release you from the absolute heaven sword. What? If it was the former, they wouldn't be moved. But how could the Wind clan's divine ancestor, an old demon, Shui, not be moved? Why should we believe what you said? The thoughts of the Feng clan's divine ancestor echoed rapidly in Su Yu's soul. Su Yu replied calmly, "Because I am the owner of the divine monument of the returning ruins." He clenched his fist, and the returning ruined divine steel flickered in his palm. The moment it appeared, the Feng clan's sacred ancestor, an old demon, Shui, immediately let out miserable screams. The two of them were already dead objects, only leaving behind their remnant wills in time, and the returning ruins divine steel was the final destination for all returning ruins people. It was easy to imagine the suppression on them. "Quickly put away," old devil Shui shouted. The Wind clan's divine ancestor endured the pain and said excitedly, "Greetings, Sinkhole Emperor Lord." "Oh." Su Yu's eyes flickered. The master of the ruins of return? What was that? Could it be that he was the former master of the void end realm? Old devil Shui was also shocked. "Sinkhole Emperor Lord? You? If it's really you, old devil Shui, am willing to follow you from now on." "Me too," the Wind clan's divine ancestor said excitedly. In this world, who could truly bring someone back from the dead? He wasn't the master of the domain of life, nor was he the master of death. Instead, he was the Sinkhole Empyrean Lord. The first two could only affect the life and death of a living being. But the latter was the one who truly controlled the cycle of reincarnation. If he nodded, how difficult would it be to bring them, who had already returned to the mortal world? "As long as you are willing to cooperate, everything can be discussed," Su Yu said calmly. Both of them were pleasantly surprised, and they immediately withdrew from Su Yu's soul and returned to the hilt of their swords. Without any more obstacles, Su Yu immediately pulled out the absolute heaven sword. The shocking sharpness displayed the power of destruction. The entire black abyss was shaken by the reappearance of the absolute heaven sword. The scalps of the 5 great saints below were numb, and they immediately avoided Su Yu, lest they be destroyed by his sword. Even the golden skeleton that was chasing them slowed down. His blood-red eyes flickered with a flickering light, revealing fear. Su Yu did not say a word. He held the absolute heaven sword tightly and slashed toward the depths of the black abyss. There was no sword chi, nor was there any sharp aura, but as the sword slashed down, the cliff of the black abyss below immediately broke, and countless boulders fell with a rumble, pressing down on the golden skeleton. Roar! With a roar, the golden skeleton was pressed down, but it was unwilling to give up and was struggling to get up again. Su Yu took advantage of this opportunity and did not hesitate to use all his domains, even exposing the power of his holy body, just to speed up his escape from this place. It took a whole day to come here, but it only took half a day to leave. When he rushed out of the black abyss and saw the light of day again, Su Yu let out a deep breath. The black abyss was too oppressive, and what he saw was only the tip of the iceberg of the black abyss. There might be even more vast areas inside, with even more terrifying dead spirits. Roar! A roar that sounded like it was right next to his ear suddenly exploded. Su Yu's body trembled, and he immediately fled to the horizon. Turning his head, he saw that the golden skeleton had crawled out of the black abyss. But as soon as its head emerged, it was shone by the sun, and its body immediately emitted a sizzling sound. It was actually burned by the sun. With a painful roar, the golden skeleton sank back into the black abyss. This place was an ancient battlefield, and there were too many remnants left behind. As an evil being, the golden skeleton was bound to be attacked by the remnants of this place. Seeing this scene, Su Yu was a lot more relieved. But when the rest of the light swept over him, he could not help but be slightly shocked. He escaped, and the 5 great sages were also able to escape. The 5 of them looked at Su Yu from afar, their expressions extremely complicated. They wanted to chase after him, but they were afraid of the absolute heaven sword in Su Yu's palm. Su Yu's eyes flashed, and he raised the absolute heaven sword and pointed it at them. The 5 great sages were scared out of their wits. How would they dare to think about it? They turned and ran, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. Little did they know that Su Yu's palm was already covered in blood. He was now in the body of Prince Mirrorflower, and yet he was still bleeding. It was obvious that he had suffered serious injuries. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The hilt of the absolute heaven sword was constantly shaking, trying to break free from Su Yu's control. This was not the doing of the Feng clan's holy ancestor and old demon Shui. On the contrary, they had been helping Su Yu suppress the abnormality of the absolute heaven sword, because it was the sword spirit of the absolute heaven sword that was trying to break free. This sword spirit had sensed the power of the holy body from Su Yu's body, which was the most hostile power of the Holy Mountain Emperor. Therefore, it determined that Su Yu was not its master and refused to be controlled. Return to the sheath. Su Yu sheathed the absolute heaven sword and no longer touched the hilt. Only then did the absolute heaven sword stop. Su Yu himself was extremely exhausted, and he fell weakly, leaning against a huge rock and gasping for breath. The attack of the absolute heaven sword just now had caused a considerable loss. Almost all of his strength had been drained. During his rest, Su Yu recalled his trip to the Holy Sword Tribe and could not help but click his tongue. There had been many dangers, and a slight carelessness would have meant death. It was not easy to survive. However, all the risks were worth it. Not only had he obtained the primordial energy, but the amount far exceeded his expectations, reaching a full 70%. More importantly, he had obtained the absolute heaven sword. This was really unexpected. According to Mo Hung, this sword was a quasi-saint artifact, no less than the divine 9-dragon cauldron of the past. If I had grasped this sword back then, I would have been able to subdue the 9th realm, Su Yu said regretfully. Now that he lacked the 9th realm, he could not begin to refine the real divine 9-dragon cauldron. Forget it. The 9th realm's ambition is higher than the sky. Hiding is only temporary, and it will show itself sooner or later, Su Yu murmured. After resting for a moment, he swept his gaze and could not help but look beyond the sky. He wondered how the common people who had stayed behind in the broken civilization were doing. The demonic beast army that was handed over to them should have been tamed, right? Chapter 29:29. He had been gone for so long. It was time to return, right? With that in mind, he left the ancient battlefield and headed toward the exit of the 9-star civilization. 10 days later, Su Yu's eyes finally reflected a lush, dark green color. After 10 days of trekking, he had finally successfully left the ancient battlefield. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly caught a glimpse of a figure wearing a bamboo hat and a coat. He was not far away and had left at about the same time as Su Yu. Su Yu had not paid much attention and had no intention of spying on him. But his eyes had still been injured by the absolute heaven sword and were in a state of blindness. Thus, he had maintained the use of his soul eyes. Thus, with one glance, he had accidentally seen through the other party's bamboo hat. Seeing the figure, Su Yu was a little surprised. Mo Hung, the genius craftsman imprisoned by the famed Sword Saint clan? Sensing something, Mo Hung abruptly turned to look at Zhang Xian, sending him a warning look. But upon closer inspection, he realized it was Su Yu and could not help but cry out in surprise. "It's you?" He quickly walked over, his expression incredulous. "You were able to escape the famed Sword Saint clan alive." He knew that Su Yu had escaped before the disastrous fire appeared, but he did not know that Su Yu had the ability to face the pursuit of the famed Sword Saint clan. Su Yu smiled. "You are the one who is truly surprising." His words seemed to have a deeper meaning. No matter how one looked at it, Mo Hung was surprising. Firstly, he could also escape, as if he had predicted that the famed Sword Saint clan would encounter a drastic change. Secondly, his craftsmanship skills were truly extraordinary. Not only did he predict that there was a problem with the crafting process of the absolute heaven sword, But even more frightening was that the iron ball he crafted was several times more effective than the one crafted by Huang Dasheng and the others. So much so that Suyu had relied on a single iron ball to snatch away a full 70% of the primordial energy. No one would believe it if they said it. It could be seen that Mo Heng's craftsmanship skills were the best among the 100 craftsmen of the famed Sword Saint clan. Even in the entire 9-star civilization, there were not many who could compare. After all, the famed Sword Saint clan was the pinnacle of craftsmanship. The other forces should not have many more powerful craftsmen than the famed Sword Saint clan. You flatter me. Mo Heng let out a light laugh. Congratulations on getting your wish and obtaining most of the primordial energy. But to be honest, I never thought that you would really succeed. Mo Heng sighed. In the beginning, he had warned Su Yu and Bai Shui not to enter the famed Sword Saint clan, where they would be in deep trouble. But what was the result? Su Yu said, I have to thank you for your gift. Otherwise, I wouldn't be where I am today. It was conceivable that if they really went empty-handed like what the invitation letter said, would they be able to obtain a trace of primordial energy? Of course not. They could only watch helplessly as Huang Dasheng and the others used the iron balls to collect all the primordial energy, leaving nothing behind. Your Excellency, congratulations on gaining your freedom. May I know where you will go next? So you finally had some free time, so he chatted with him for a bit. Mo Heng looked at the vast land and shook his head slightly. I don't know either. He had been imprisoned for half an epoch. His clan of the past had long since been obliterated by the passage of time, and he had lost contact with his old friends. Although he had escaped, he did not have a place to stay. Are you interested in following me to the outside world? Suyu pointed at the dark, starry sky of the boundless expanse. Mo Heng thought for a moment, looking Suyu up and down, deep in thought. Suyu knew what he was worried about, and said, Don't worry, I am not from the famed Sword Saint clan. I do not need to confine you to craft any artifacts. After careful thought, Mo Heng slowly nodded. All right, I can accompany you to have a look. But let me make this clear, do not persuade me to join any forces. I have had enough of being bound. In the end, he agreed, because he remembered the scene of Su Yu saving him. As a strong martial artist, he could have ignored him, who was about to be killed by the skeleton, but Su Yu still did so. It could be seen that Su Yu still had a sense of justice in his heart that was rarely seen in strong martial artists. Would such a person confine him? Obviously not. Moreover, he had not fully repaid the debt of saving his life. It would not be too late to find an opportunity along the way to repay him. Of course, Su Yu said indifferently, and so the two of them set off together. A few months later, they once again came to the entrance of the 9-star civilization. The checks here were stricter than before, and what made Su Yu frown slightly was that in the past, only those who entered the 9-star civilization had to be checked. There was no need to search when leaving. Now, even leaving had to show a document, and the pythons in the passageway had all been replaced with gold. The presence of a total of 9 giant pythons made it impossible for the person with the fake document to hide. This is troublesome, Mo Heng said with a frown. I have been imprisoned for many years. The document has long been destroyed. Without the document, he could not leave the 9-star civilization. The 9-star civilization is not a place to stay for long. That foolish son of mine will most likely save the core members of the Sword Saint tribe. After they catch their breath, they will track me down sooner or later. I must head to the outer world. Suyu frowned and asked, To tell you the truth, I do not have the real document. How do I obtain it? There had to be an organization that issued the document, right? It could not have appeared out of thin air. Moreover, Su Yu discovered that in the 9-star civilization, it was not only the strong who had the document. Many low-level cultivators and even ordinary people had the document. It could be seen that obtaining the document was not very difficult. Obtaining the real document is both easy and difficult, Mo Heng said. In order to obtain the document, you need to be at least an influential family with the approval of the stone statue issued by the Holy Mountain. Su Yu's eyes flickered. Stone statue, Mo Heng said. That's right. Every influential family has one. Only the document that has been stamped by the stone statue is the real document. As he spoke, Mo Hung sighed incessantly. If it was in the past, a casual word from me would cause countless great clans to rush to issue me official documents. But now, I believe many people have already forgotten my name. His social circle had long since been destroyed during his imprisonment for half an era. Moreover, even if he still had contact with them, he would not dare to take the initiative to look for them. Who could guarantee that they had not been bribed by the Sword Saint tribe? Once he came into contact with them, he might be caught again. The stone statue you mentioned, is it this? Suyu took out a very simple stone statue from the space storage device. The base of the stone statue was carved with complicated words. This stone statue exuded an extremely dense aura of chaos. Seeing this item, Mo Heng's eyes widened. Where did you get this? His face was filled with astonishment. He did not understand at all. If Suyu had this item, why did he not have a document? Oh, it's true, Suyu muttered. It looks like I really did snatch an incredible item. This item was one of the 3 items he had snatched from by Shue's personal storage device. He had already used the invitation letter from the Sword Saint tribe. There was still the seal of the Heavenly Law Palace and the stone statue in front of him. Chapter 29:30. Snatched. Mo Hung clicked his tongue. Then you really did snatch something good. With this item, you can gather all the wanderers from the outside world. Suyu's heart skipped a beat. Yes, most of the wanderers would want to obtain the identity of a 9-star civilization. But their identities were very special. Most of them were defeated people who had been chased away, or those sinners who had been exiled to the outside world, or the descendants of those sinners. The forces of the 9-star civilizations were not willing to give them the official documents, because whoever gave them the official documents would be responsible for them. If they caused a huge incident in the 9-star civilizations after obtaining the official documents, the force that gave them the official documents would be severely punished. Ha ha ha, I really have to thank Bai Shui. Suyu was suddenly enlightened. He had always been worried about his own people. The people in the Nightmare Crossing Lotus were like him, without official documents. He could think of a way to come to the 9-star civilizations, and he could do whatever he wanted there. But could they? If they were not careful and were found to have no official documents in the 9-star civilizations, the consequences would be dire. So they could only stay in the Nightmare Crossing Lotus. But now it was different. With this stone statue, he could create official documents in bulk for them. After thinking for a moment, Suyu took out the seal of the Heavenly Law Palace. What about this item? What does it do? Mo Hung looked at the item, his mouth twitching. Did you just rob the Palace of Heavenly Law? Why did you take out their seal of the Heavenly Law Palace? Suyu asked. Apart from commanding the Palace of Heavenly Law, what use does this item have in the outside world? Mo Hung clicked his tongue. Use? With this item, you would have a dominating position in the outside world. Wherever you go, all the wanderers would bow down and worship you. The Palace of Heavenly Law is known as the Alliance of the Pathmasters. It is the holy land of the Pathmasters. With this item, you can command the outside world. The competition among the 9-star civilizations was extremely fierce. Most of the forces appeared in the form of families. There were very few organizations like the Palace of Heavenly Law that were formed by ordinary living beings. Many wanderers with good cultivation bases wanted to join the Palace of Heavenly Law. Unfortunately, the Palace of Heavenly Law never favored the wanderers of the outside world. If Suyu held the seal of the Heavenly Law Palace and appeared as the master of the Heavenly Law Palace, one could imagine how influential he would be to the wanderers. Suyu was overjoyed. Stripping Bai Xuan naked and forcefully snatching the crystal storage device from her chest had been a wise decision. Many thanks for your guidance. Suyu went to a corner and wrote 2 official documents on the spot, then stamped them with the stone statue's seal. As such, Suyu and Mo Hung swaggered into the passageway with the real document in their hands. When Mo Hung passed through, the golden python's eyes scanned Mo Hung's body. Then, it withdrew its gaze expressionlessly, as if nothing had happened. The inspector in the passageway immediately let them pass without making things difficult for them. It was Suyu's turn next. When he walked through the passageway, The 9 giant pythons looked at him and confirmed that it was the real document, so they didn't stop him. However, when the 10th eye looked over, it suddenly let out a sharp cry. Suyu's heart skipped a beat when he saw it. This giant golden python was the one that had discovered that he was a fake and its attack was ineffective. The document in Suyu's hand was real, but the golden python still remembered its aura. Now it recognized it immediately. This beast. Suyu cursed in his heart, but he remained calm and did not panic. Whoosh! Dozens of powerful fighters locked their gazes on Suyu, filled with murderous intent. Powerful fighters appeared on both sides of the passageway at the same time, surrounding him with powerful Dao artifacts. The leader was none other than the black-robed man from before. He walked over solemnly and stared at Suyu cautiously. Hand over the document. Suyu handed the document over expressionlessly. The black-robed man took it and looked at it carefully. Special certificate from the Heavenly Law Palace. Holder, Xia Baishuo. Why is this name so weird? Xia Baishuo was obviously thanking Baishuo for allowing him to snatch the 2 treasures. Suyu said calmly, "What can I do if my parents give me a name?" Humph. The black-robed man grunted. He took out a testing device and carefully examined the seal on Suyu's document. After examining it for a while, he put away the device and returned the document to Suyu. "All right, let's go." Suyu pointed at the golden python that was baring its fangs at him. "What's going on?" The black-robed man stared at him. "Something must have gone wrong. I suggest you change to another one. It would not be good if something like this happened when some big shot traveled in the future," Suyu said as he slowly walked out with his hands behind his back. When the golden python heard this, it was so angry that it hissed nonstop. It anxiously wanted to tell the black-robed man that he was the infiltrator who had escaped. Unfortunately, it was a combination of a treasure and a living being. It could not speak. The black-robed man did not understand. He frowned and said, "Someone change this python." What if, as Suyu said, a big shot came in the future and this problematic python caused a commotion? Yes. A group of stone guards immediately stepped forward and pulled the golden python down. The python screamed at the back of Suyu's departing figure, but no one could understand in the outside world. Looking at the pitch-black world, Suyu felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. "What happened to the python?" Mo Hung asked. Suyu smiled and shook his head. "Nothing much. I just taught it a small lesson." He took a step forward, heading toward the dilapidated civilization. "Can I ask for your help?" Suyu took out the Nightmare Crossing Lotus Throne and sat on it. Mo Hung understood. "You want to absorb the primordial energy, right? Don't worry, I will protect you." Suyu thanked him. "When I am done with my cultivation, I will give you 10% as repayment." He would not be able to use up so much primordial energy alone. There was no harm in thanking Mo Hung. Mo Hung's eyes flashed with desire. "Thank you in advance." He had been imprisoned for many years, his cultivation stagnant. He really wanted to improve his abilities. Under Mo Hung's protection, Suyu began to absorb the primordial energy. He took out the iron ball and gently sucked it in with his palm. The primordial energy flowed into his body through his skin like warm spring water. Instantly, his body was filled with unprecedented power. It was as if every muscle in his body was filled with power and trembled continuously. His cultivation level, which had been stagnant for a long time, also soared. Back then, the human ancestor had used his spine as a path to open a path to heaven for Suyu, allowing his cultivation level to break through to the beginner level of the Heavenly Law Master. Now, under the nourishment of the primordial energy, his cultivation level soared once again. Half a day later, in the dark starry sky, there was a sudden gust of wind. A strange black cloud shrouded the sky. Lightning flickered inside, releasing a sharp and dangerous aura. Chapter 29:31. A middle-stage Heaven Law Master was not rare in a 9-star civilization. What was rare was that it would attract a terrifying heavenly tribulation. The heavenly tribulations of a 9-star civilization most often came from the Holy Mountain. Only when the will of the Holy Mountain strongly objected or wanted to suppress certain living creatures would such a situation occur. Rumble. What was even more shocking was yet to come. Not only did the heavenly tribulation lightning appear in the sky, but the shadows of stone statues also appeared. There were a total of 10 stone statues, each exceptionally majestic and huge. What? Shadow tribulation? Emohung gasped. The holy mountain heaven's sun had many forms of heavenly tribulations that needed to be suppressed, but the most powerful of them was certainly not the so-called lightning or fire tribulations. One of the most terrifying tribulations was the shadow tribulation. The so-called shadow tribulation was the descent of the projections of the 10 holy mountain heaven's suns to prevent the suppressed living creatures from breaking through further. This tribulation could cause the tribulation taker's breakthrough to be interrupted in the worst case. Who the hell is this person? Emohang's eyes widened, his breathing quickening. He had thought that Suyu was just a very powerful young man. Now it seemed that was clearly not the case. Suyu was an existence that even the holy mountain had to suppress. Throughout history, there were only a handful of people who were qualified to be treated by the shadow tribulation of the holy mountain. All of them were peerless existences. As he pondered, the tribulation had already begun. First, a dense thunderbolt descended like a storm, wantonly destroying the absolute beginning energy that Suyu had gathered around him. In order for Suyu's cultivation to break through, apart from primordial energy, he also needed to absorb a large amount of external absolute beginning energy to transform his body. Otherwise, the breakthrough would definitely fail. The first step of the tribulation was to interrupt Suyu's breakthrough. Its intentions were tyrannical. Emohung hesitated for a moment, resisting the urge to attack, and slowly withdrew from the range of the heavenly tribulation. The tribulation taker had to withstand the heavenly tribulation alone. If there was help from an outsider, the heavenly tribulation would sense it, and its power would increase exponentially. At that time, it would not just increase by 2 times, but by several times. That would only put Suyu in a more dangerous situation. Rumble. The absolute beginning energy around Suyu was dissipating at an alarming rate. Although he was in seclusion, he could see the situation in the outside world clearly. His nostrils flared, and an ancient oil lamp appeared above his head. Seeing this item, Emohung was shocked. A saint physique? The divine physique was a taboo existence in the 9-star civilizations because it was the mortal enemy of the sun of the holy mountain. For all eras, the divine physique was an existence that the sun of the holy mountain wanted to get rid of. He finally understood why Suyu had attracted the terrifying shadow disaster. As soon as the oil lamp appeared, it immediately emitted a 9-colored light that protected the surrounding primordial chi, preventing it from being dispersed by the lightning. As for the tribulation lightning, it crashed down, attempting to shatter the protection of the 9-colored light. However, it failed and was instead blocked by the 9-colored light. The heavenly tribulation did not stop. Instead, it became even more turbulent. The tribulation lightning in the dark clouds seemed to be free of charge as it continuously poured down. Hundreds of lightning bolts bombarded the light barrier without pause. Suyu's oil lamp had absorbed a great deal of faith and was much stronger than before. However, it still couldn't withstand the indiscriminate bombardment of the disastrous thunder. Not long after, the flame of the oil lamp began to flicker, as if it was about to be extinguished. Suyu, on the other hand, remained calm as he continued to advance his cultivation in an orderly manner. Strands of alpha-origin chi entered his body through his pores, speeding up his cultivation breakthrough. Half an hour later, the light barrier released by the oil lamp had become much dimmer and was on the brink of collapse. However, Suyu had already completed most of the process of his cultivation breakthrough. The light barrier was completely capable of supporting him until his cultivation finally broke through. As if the heavenly disaster had sensed this, the lightning gradually stopped. The world that had been filled with unceasing thunder finally quieted down. However, Emohung didn't feel that the heavenly disaster had passed. Instead, he understood that this was the true beginning of the heavenly disaster. The previous disastrous thunder was only a warning to Suyu, forcing him to stop his breakthrough. However, Suyu ignored it. The result was that the true heavenly disaster had descended. At that moment, the quiet dark clouds suddenly churned like boiling water. The projections of the 10 heavenly suns flickered, their solemn faces appearing in the layers of clouds. At the same time, an ancient and ethereal voice floated in the vast starry sky. Everything in the world nourishes man, but man has nothing to repay the heavens. Destroy the heavenly disciples. Destroy the holy mountain. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The 10 massive projections descended into the starry sky, blocking Suyu's path. Suyu sat cross-legged, quietly waiting for the final breakthrough. The light of the holy body condensed into a 9-colored giant that spanned across the sky. The outline of the giant was no different from Suyu. 11 light and shadow giants faced each other in the dark starry sky. Holy mountain, what right do you have to call yourself the heavens after stealing from the great beginning realm? The giant projection's voice shook the starry sky. The great beginning realm is the great beginning realm of all things, not the realm of your holy mountain. What's more, your holy mountain kills all other creatures in every era. Only the 9-star creatures that submit to you can stay out of it. It's ridiculous that you still call yourself the heavens that bless the world. The 10 projections of the 10 heavenly suns remained solemn as they said in unison, "Destroy the heavenly disciples. Destroy the holy mountain." Whoosh! The projections of the heavenly suns all moved, each displaying the heaven-crossing divine technique. Among them, there was the life and death of the 9-tailed heavenly sun, the stone mirror of Mirror Flower heavenly sun, and the ruler of Xiaoyao heavenly sun. The projection of the heavenly suns in the middle was the most powerful. It took out a palm-sized mountain, and when it was gently thrown out, it felt as if the world was pressing down. And this was just a projection of the holy mountain heavenly suns, not even a clone. However, the power of the collision was still extremely terrifying, close to the level of a great saint. As someone who had broken through to the peak of the early stage of the heavenly law master, such a shadow tribulation was definitely a tribulation of death. Unfortunately, they encountered Suyu, the great emperor of life and death. The body of the shadow of a 9-colored holy body suddenly dimmed and became petrified. Then, with a grasp of his palm, the great scythe of 10,000 tribulations appeared in his palm. The turbulent power of chaos poured into the great scythe of 10,000 tribulations, pushing it to its greatest extent. 10 golden skeletons slowly emerged. With a wave of Suyu's hand, the destructive black light appeared out of nowhere. Even the ancient god Jiolong's tail was cut off, let alone the 10 shadows in front of him. Crack! Bang! The black light swept across everything, unstoppable. After all, the projections were only projections, and their power was limited. They were all wiped out. But the black light was also used up. Seeing that the techniques of the projections were ineffective, they performed seals together without any expression. Suyu saw this, and his brows twitched slightly. He felt a sense of danger. It seemed that the 10 projections were joining forces to perform some very dangerous technique. Suyu's eyes narrowed, and he took a deep breath, secretly activating the shadow of the holy body. The latter also performed a rather strange technique. His fingers drew several strokes in front of him, and the surface of his body sketched out marvelous trajectories. Chapter 29:32. He wouldn't understand that it was a move from the Ultimate Ruins divine tablet. Every move was the source of all the divine techniques of the 10,000 clans. Naturally, it was more powerful than the legacy of the Eagle clan. As soon as the trajectory appeared, it immediately set off a pitch-black residual shadow, like a giant eagle crossing the star region. The residual shadow was surrounded by lightning. That was because the residual shadow was too fast, and the friction with the atmosphere produced lightning. Whoosh! The residual shadow flashed away, and when the 10 projections were still condensing to attack, it rushed into the 10 projections first. Crash! With a loud noise, the 10 projections were destroyed by the residual shadow on the spot. This was once the most brilliant ancestral technique of the Eagle Saint clan. Of course, because Suyu's cultivation was relatively low, its power was not obvious. However, it was more than enough to destroy the 10 projections. Mo Hung secretly marveled. He stared at Suyu, feeling incredulous. The shadow tribulation was resolved just like that? No. According to the rumors, the shadow tribulation would not stop until it achieved its goal. As soon as this thought occurred to him, a mighty voice spread through the world. Sealing shadow, the broken 10 heavenly sun shadows turned into nails, falling from the sky, covering the entire sky and covering the holy body projection. The projection once again displayed the ancestral technique of the Eagle Saint clan, and a residual shadow flew into the sky. However, the 10 Son of Heaven projections had all been destroyed. Those unknown steel nails had actually turned into countless afterimages as they fell down one after another. Su Yu's eyelids twitched, and he was hesitating whether to give up the breakthrough. Suddenly, he found that the nails did not cause much physical damage to the holy body projection. Instead, they all penetrated the body and fell to the ground. However, Suyu did not feel at ease because of this. Instead, his eyebrows twitched even more, and he felt even more uneasy. Not good. Although he did not know what the so-called sealing shadow was, he must not let them succeed. Protection of faith. Suyu growled, and with a stretch of his arms, a cavern world appeared in his sleeves. This was the world of faith that he had seized from the Lord of Nirvana with the help of Sheng Yuanxin. After a period of cultivation, one of them had truly become his faith. At this moment, a substantial power of faith overflowed from the cavern world and spread on the ground. In this way, apart from the first 3 nails that successfully landed on the ground, the rest of the nails were intercepted by the power of faith. What happened next caused Su Yu's pupils to contract. After the power of faith was nailed, it was fixed on the ground forever, no longer obeying Su Yu's commands. Su Yu's heart skipped a beat. He recalled the projection of the holy body and revealed his own shadow. 3 nails were nailed into his chest, the space between his eyebrows and his neck. Su Yu tried to move his body, only to discover that while his body could move, his shadow remained there, unable to move. Moreover, he felt intense pain in his forehead, neck, and chest. It was as if something was burning, and it was spreading to the rest of his body. A soul attack. Su Yu immediately realized what was going on. That nail directly harmed the soul. The most vicious thing was that because the nails contained the aura of the sacred mountain Son of Heaven, the damage to the soul was permanent and irreversible. Once one's soul was damaged, it would be difficult for one's cultivation to progress. Seeing that the nails were about to inflict damage on his soul, Su Yu decisively severed all the souls that had been injured by the nails. Hiss! With a sharp pain from his soul, his 3 souls were cut out by 2 nails and separated from his body. He had lost at least 10% of his soul strength. However, he successfully avoided permanent damage to his soul. The shadow, tribulation dissipated, and the entire heavenly tribulation was completely over. The dark clouds in the sky quickly dissipated. Su Yu's face was pale, and beads of sweat appeared on his face as he gasped for breath. Resisting the sharp pain in his soul, Su Yu took a deep breath and forcibly completed the breakthrough of his cultivation. With a pop, the Taoist marks in his body were completely fulfilled. All the primordial energy outside his body flowed into his body and turned into the extremely pure power of the master of the heavenly law. Su Yu clenched his fists, and a feeling of controlling the world arose in his heart. It was as if he was standing on a completely different level before and after the breakthrough. He held the great scythe of 10,000 calamity and waved it toward the starry sky, and a destructive light swept out. In terms of power, it was more than twice as powerful as before. This was the benefit of the breakthrough of his cultivation. The power of all kinds of magical artifacts and divine techniques had been increased exponentially. It's a pity that my soul was damaged, and I don't know how long it will take to recover. Su Yu was not without regret. At the same time, His eyes were filled with hatred. Holy Mountain, Son of Heaven. In the past, when he was in an 8-star civilization, the Holy Mountain Son of Heaven could not control him. But it was different in a 9-star civilization. The first time he broke through in a 9-star civilization, he was suppressed by the Holy Mountain Son of Heaven. If he had not decisively destroyed his soul, his life would have been ruined. You should be content, Emo Hung said, the shock that had not yet faded from his face. Since ancient times, no one has ever escaped from the shadow tribulation. At the very least, their cultivation would be interrupted, and, at the very worst, they would die on the spot. Look at you. Only your soul was damaged. This kind of damage to the soul could be recovered, but compared to Su Yu's gains, it was not worth mentioning. Su Yu said proudly, "Shadow tribulation? Humph, sooner or later, I will become the great tribulation in the life of the stone embryo Son of Heaven." The hatred between him and the Holy Mountain Son of Heaven had long been irreconcilable, and could only be repaid with blood. Don't be too pleased with yourself, Emo Hung said profoundly. Emo Hung said meaningfully, for those who have been taken care of by the shadow tribulation, every time they break through, there will be an even more powerful tribulation descending, until the legendary Son of Heaven of the Sacred Mountain personally descends to stop your cultivation breakthrough. The Son of Heaven personally descends? Su Yu's eyes narrowed. With his current cultivation level, he was no match for the Son of Heaven. But you don't have to worry too much, Emo Hung comforted him. Only if you reach the great saint level will you be able to attract the Son of Heaven's attention. With that, Su Yu heaved a sigh of relief. When he reached the great saint level, there should be other opportunities. By then, you would not need to fear the Holy Mountain Son of Heaven. Let's go, Su Yu said expressionlessly, keeping the great scythe of 10,000 calamity. Emo Hung stood in his original position, not moving. Are you not planning to kill me to silence me? I have personally witnessed your holy physique. A holy physique was a taboo existence in a 9-star civilization. Once discovered, one would be hunted down by the Holy Mountain Son of Heaven. Su Yu calmly said, I don't think you are that foolish. Exposing me will only bring you harm. Emo Hung had nowhere to go. At the moment, Su Yu was the only person he could trust. There was no benefit in reporting him. Emo Hung could not help but laugh. It is so easy to get along with smart people. He looked at the great scythe of 10,000 calamity that Su Yu had just put away. Maybe I can help you increase the power of this scythe. Of course, that is if you trust me. What? The power of the great scythe of 10,000 calamity could be increased? Su Yu was excited. Chapter 29:33. The great scythe of 10,000 calamity was a peerless treasure made from the corpse of the Taotai ancestor that the Holy Mountain had killed. They had placed it among the 8-star civilizations and given it to the 8 great masters under their control to kill the powerful fighters who had prevented the Holy Mountain from destroying the world at the critical moment. Unfortunately, it had never been used, and it had instead become Su Yu's possession. Is the great scythe of 10,000 calamity not a finished product? Su Yu immediately took out the great scythe of 10,000 calamity and showed it to Emo Hung. Emo Hung shook his head. The crafting technique is rather crude. I think it was casually crafted by the heavenly masters. He pointed to the 10 heads on the scythe. The Taotai ancestor should have another head. Rumor had it that the Taotai ancestor had a total of 10 heads. One of them was the main head, and the other 9 were all subheads. There was actually an 11th head. The 10th head was a true world formed with the help of its master in the past. Emo Hung said slowly, revealing a secret that many people did not know. Su Yu was surprised. Are you talking about the Taichu Pathmaster? If it was the Taichu Pathmaster, it would not be strange at all. That Pathmaster was so powerful that he could do anything. You know the Taichu Pathmaster? Emo Hung felt that it was inconceivable. Not many people know of this name. I only found out about this legendary figure from the books passed down from generation to generation in the Sacred Sword clan. Almost no one in the 9-star civilizations knew of the Taichu Pathmaster. They only knew that it was the holy mountain and the 10 heavenly masters who informed them. It was also from that book that I found out that the Taichu Dao Lord had an extremely powerful pet called Tao Tai. And Mo Hung took the great scythe of 10,000 calamity from the Taichu Path Master's hands. I also learned that the heavenly masters refined its corpse into the great scythe of 10,000 calamity. And Mo Heng's eyes were filled with emotion. What a waste. Such a precious corpse was only refined into something like this. It is not even a tenth of the absolute heaven sword. If I had been the one to refine it back then, it would not have been inferior to the absolute heaven sword. Even if he were to refine it now, it would only have slightly improved the great scythe of 10,000 calamity. It would not have fundamentally changed the grade of the great scythe of 10,000 calamity. If you are at ease, leave it with me for half a year. 6 months later, I will give you a different great scythe of 1,000 calamity. And Mo Hung said. Suyu said, no problem. The scythe of 10,000 tribulations was a useless object in the hands of others. Only someone like him, who controlled half of the Son of Heaven's body, could activate most of its power. What harm was there in handing it over to Mo Hung? Without another word, the two of them rushed toward the dilapidated civilization. Several months later, when they were approaching the dilapidated civilization, Suyu remembered Wen Cheng. At that time, because it was too dangerous, he had no choice but to keep it in the evil traversing lotus throne. With a tap of his finger, Wen Cheng appeared in a daze. He looked around at the dark stars and couldn't help but exclaim, "We're back." She then glared at Suyu bitterly. "Liar! Liar!" Tears welled up in her eyes, and she was full of grievances. "You promised to show me around, but you locked me in a space storage device for half a year." Suyu smiled. With a flick of his finger, a wisp of primordial energy shot into the space between Wen Cheng's brows. Immediately, Wen Cheng felt an extremely warm energy in his body, and it nourished his limbs and bones, causing his cultivation to skyrocket. "Oh, what is this?" Wen Cheng was surprised and delighted. She couldn't remember how many years it had been since her cultivation had improved. "Sit down and train," Suyu said calmly. Wen Cheng immediately sat down with her legs crossed happily, waiting for her cultivation to break through. Several days later, a path of the heavenly law stretched across the vast sky. Wen Cheng opened her eyes and stepped on it, walking straight to the end. Her cultivation broke through to the early stage of the heavenly law master. Suyu's mouth twitched when he saw this. This was fate. In order to break through to the heavenly law master, Suyu had gone through a lot of trouble. When he walked on the path of the heavenly law, he was chased and intercepted by people from the holy mountain. In the end, even the path of the heavenly law was cut off by the holy mountain. If the human ancestor hadn't turned his spine into the heavenly law and helped Suyu complete his last journey, Suyu would probably still be a path master. Wen Cheng, on the other hand, could easily become the heavenly law master. However, the only thing he gained was that he still had a lot of similar primordial energy. Before this, he had only used 10% of it. Just now, he had only used a tiny bit of it, which was the remaining 10,000th of it. Even so, he could easily create a heavenly law master. If he used up all the remaining primordial energy, he didn't know how many more he could create. "My biggest gain this time is probably the primordial energy," Suyu murmured. He took out 10% of the remaining 60% and put it in a jade bottle. This bottle was reserved for Xia Jingyu. She should also need the primordial energy. "Thank you, Ruyu." Wen Cheng's face was flushed and full of excitement. She hugged Suyu's arm joyfully. Suyu withdrew his hand calmly and said, "I have fulfilled my promise to show you the outside world." Wen Cheng nodded delightedly, her eyes flickering. "I will never forget it." Her first long journey made her realize how prosperous the 9-star civilization was, how vast the starry world was, and how insignificant she was. "Ruyu, will you leave me soon?" Wen Cheng murmured to herself as she looked at the deep starry sky. Suyu was silent for a moment, then said, "All good things must come to an end." He was very grateful to Wen Cheng for releasing him from the White Heavenly Book, and even more grateful to her for taking care of him. but the two of them would have to part sooner or later. After this trip to the dilapidated civilization, he would gather his people and enter the 9-star civilization. On the day of our separation, I will give you a gift. Wencheng bit her red lips as if she had made a decision. A gift? Suyu remembered it in his heart. Half a month later. Finally, the dilapidated civilization was close at hand. That dim, abandoned civilization gave the Wencheng family warmth. Before they arrived, City Master Wen Yuan had led a group of strong men from the dilapidated civilization to welcome them. Wencheng, father. When the father and daughter saw each other, they could not help but hug and cry. Looking at the heartwarming scene, Suyu smiled and led Mo hung away. In an abandoned corner of the dilapidated civilization, the roars of beasts could be heard. A petite girl was lying on a recliner made of animal skin. She was chewing on some heaven and earth treasures that would make ordinary people drool. Have you not eaten? Use more strength. That demonic beast, if you are not obedient, I will cook you tonight. And you, do you believe that I will cut off your balls and use them as a side dish? So you heard the shouting from afar. The veins on his forehead could not help but bulge. I asked you to train demonic beasts, not to learn how to cook. The petite girl jumped up from the recliner, exclaiming in surprise, "Ah, you are back." She was none other than Xiao Dai. Her face was filled with joy, but she quickly realized that she should keep a straight face. Humph, so what if I am back? I'm not happy. Chapter 29:34. So you touched his chin. How did I change? You used to bring women back when you went out, but now you've brought a man back. Xiao Dai hugged her chest in disgust and said, "Did you really change your sexual orientation after being a woman for so long?" The more she thought about it, the more disgusted Xiao Dai became. She kept stepping back and said, "But if you want to change, then I can accept you. But how could you like such an old man?" "You're no longer the Suyu I know," Xiao Dai said with tears in her eyes. Suyu clenched his fists and smiled stiffly. "Do you know there are 4 big words on your forehead?" Xiao Dai touched her forehead and said blankly, "No." "What words did you see?" Suyu laughed. "I saw the words, I want to get beaten up." Xiao Dai was startled, and then she covered her mouth and laughed. "I'm just teasing you. Who asked you to leave for so long without bringing anything for me?" Suyu loosened his fists and said angrily, "Who said I have nothing for you?" He flicked his finger, and half a drop of primordial energy flew over. Xiao Dai was shocked, and her eyes opened wide. What a treasure! She was the most sensitive to treasures, and she immediately noticed the difference in the primordial energy. She flew over and opened her mouth, and the primordial energy was in it. "Wow, it's a good treasure for improving cultivation," Xiao Dai said excitedly. Her cultivation could only improve by leaps and bounds through evolution. Therefore, since the last time she broke out of the cocoon, her cultivation had been stagnant and had not improved since. But the primordial energy was different. It was the purest energy in the world, and it was not inferior to the energy produced by evolution. It was more than enough for her to make a breakthrough. Moreover, what made Xiao Dai ecstatic was that this half drop of primordial energy was equivalent to what she needed to evolve again. "Suyu, I love you so much." Xiao Dai sat down with her legs crossed happily and immediately began to refine this drop of primordial energy. This breakthrough was equivalent to another evolution. Suyu was worried. "You won't evolve into an old woman this time, will you?" Every time she evolved, Xiao Dai would grow a little bigger. Now that she was a young woman, she would become a middle-aged woman. "Jinx!" Xiao Dai puffed up her cheeks and rolled her eyes at him. "I'm already an adult, so my appearance won't change much. What will evolve is only my cultivation and talent." Talent? So you could not help but look forward to it. Xiao Dai's evolution had never disappointed him. "Why? You don't want me to grow old?" Little Butterfly said with a smile that was not a smile. Her flat chest even puffed up proudly. Suyu said indifferently, "You are thinking too much. You don't mean what you say." Xiao Dai rolled her eyes, then closed her eyes and began to guide the energy into her body. When Suyu saw that he had started to train, he cut to the chase. "Did anything special happen while I was away?" In the ruins, the strong preyed on the weak, and there were dangers everywhere. While he was away, he was a little worried that some unknown force would covet it. "It's very stable," Little Butterfly said, then slowly opened her eyes and said, "To be precise, it's abnormally stable. In the past, the nearby civilizations would have disputes with this broken civilization every few days. If it's light, he'll resort to violence. If it's heavy, he'll lead troops to invade. But in the last 6 months, there hasn't been a fight or a quarrel. It seems that they haven't been here recently. In the past, the nearby civilizations would occasionally send caravans to buy things from this civilization. But recently, there hadn't been any. Suyu couldn't help but be vigilant. There must be a reason for this. He said, "Didn't you send someone to investigate?" "Yes. City Master Wen Yuan dispatched a team of strong men, and our Cauldron also sent Sheng Yuanxin and a group of strong men, but there has been no news yet." Xiao Dai shrugged helplessly. "Sheng Yuanxin?" Suyu was a little surprised. "Why did she go?" "Humph. Look at how distressed you are. She didn't want to be idle and wanted to do something for you. So, she volunteered. I didn't harm her." Xiao Dai snorted. Suyu was a little worried about Sheng Yuanxin's safety. In the Tao Abyss, thanks to her stealing more than half of the Lord of Nirvana's faith, they had a chance to turn the tables. Otherwise, the consequences would be unpredictable. In the end, before Suyu could thank her, she took another risk. "Don't worry. Sheng Yuanxin and the people are all carrying the best escape treasures. If anything happens, they can definitely come back immediately." If that was the case, Suyu was relieved. Moreover, he remembered that Sheng Yuanxin seemed to have cultivated a very special divine technique. If one of herself died, another would immediately appear to replace her. It seemed to be called the six-path divine technique. "I hope so," Suyu murmured. "You should train well." He turned and returned to the Wenyuan City Master's manor to settle Imo Hung down. The environment of the broken civilization is like this. The path energy of the broken civilization was very weak, far inferior to that of a 9-star civilization. "Don't say that. It's much better than being enslaved by the Sacred Sword Tribe," Imo Hung said indifferently. "I will be in seclusion for a few more months. When the time comes, I will definitely refine the great sickle of 10,000 calamity." "Thank you." Suyu cupped his fists and entered another secret chamber to begin his seclusion. He also had many things to do, one of which was to provide real documents for the people he was protecting. This stone statue would be taken back by the Palace of Heaven sooner or later. If he did not hurry to create more documents, there would be no more opportunities like this in the future. The number of people he protected was astronomical. Even with the help of various divine techniques, it was still a huge project. Suyu beckoned with one hand and summoned the sinful lady and the other elites. With their assistance, he began to create the documents in an orderly manner. Time passed by in a flash. 2 months later, Suyu had been creating documents day and night. Finally, he had issued brand new documents to the trillions of people. Even the cavern world of the faith he had seized was no exception. Every living creature had one. Because of this, many living creatures really had faith in Suyu. After all, in their minds, the 9-star civilization was something they could only dream of. To be able to give them real documents was an honor bestowed by the heavens. Phew! Suyu exhaled. The hand that was holding the stone statue was sore and swollen, and his face was covered with sweat. He looked at the stone statue in his hand again. Perhaps because of the continuous overload, there were cracks on the base. It could not be used for long in the future. It would be completely scrapped. This time, he did not know how to explain it to Bai Shui. Right at that moment, a fragrant scent wafted over. The sinful lady was holding a handkerchief and gently wiping Suyu's sweat. Her seemingly indifferent face was filled with tenderness. "You work too hard," Suyu said. "Soon, the decisive battle with the Emperor is not far away." Once the Emperor was taken care of and the world returned to peace, he could live in seclusion and not care about the affairs of the world. Chapter 29:35. The message didn't come from him, but from Wen Cheng, who was in the room. Wen Cheng's expression was grave. She had several types of communication jade pendants with her, and different colors represented different emergencies. looking at the blood-red emergency communication jade pendant in her hand, which was flickering incessantly. Wencheng had a bad premonition. There could only be one situation when the blood-red emergency communication jade pendant rang, and it was the most serious one among all the emergencies: the invasion of foreign enemies. Ruyu, there's an invasion of foreign enemies, Wencheng said hurriedly. Suyu was slightly calm and said, I'm almost done with my work. I'll go out and take a look for you. He was also a little confused. The current dilapidated civilization had been unified by one Yuan city master, and its power was unprecedentedly strong. Unless it was an extremely powerful foreign enemy, it would be difficult to alert them to use the red communication jade pendant. The group of people walked out of the secret room, but the scene that greeted them was unexpected. The so-called invasion of foreign enemies. There was no trace of the enemy. Not even one. What they saw was an extremely shocking and bloody scene. Many blood-red skulls were tied to meteorite stones, and they fell on the dilapidated civilization like a meteor shower. Bang, bang, bang. Several meteors fell in front of the three of them. Looking at the bloody skulls, many people closed their eyes, unable to bear to watch. So you took a look, and his eyes were cold. The eyes of these skulls retained the pain and extreme fear they had when they were alive. It was obvious that their heads had been chopped off while they were still alive. Moreover, there were extremely deep scars on the faces of some of the skulls, which showed that they had been tortured before they were alive. When he looked up, there were more than 1 billion meteors in the sky. It was almost more than the number of people he had saved from the 8-star civilization. At this moment, all of them had turned into a meteor shower, falling on the dilapidated civilization. Along the way, they brought up patches of bloody mist, dyeing the sky above the dilapidated civilization red. An extreme sense of oppression made the people of the dilapidated civilization feel uneasy. This is the city master of a neighboring civilization. Wencheng suppressed her fear and looked at the skulls, but was surprised to find that she recognized one of them. In this one, he is an overbearing, strong man from another neighboring civilization. He once had a dispute with our dilapidated civilization. Without exception, they were all people from nearby civilizations. That shouldn't be the case. The civilizations nearby are all very powerful. Could it be that they provoked some existence and were destroyed? Wencheng did not feel happy. Instead, his mood was heavy. It was no wonder that during this period of time, no living beings from the neighboring civilizations came to the broken civilization. Even the people who came to trade normally did not exist. It turned out that they had all met with misfortune. It went without saying how terrifying an organization that could silently destroy all the nearby civilizations was. It seems like someone is warning us about something. The sinful lady narrowed her eyes. Suyu replied expressionlessly, It's not a warning, but a gift. Gifts? Wencheng's body trembled. She had never heard of anyone giving such a gift. Is someone taking revenge on us? She was not stupid and immediately understood what the so-called gift meant. The sinful girl narrowed her eyes. I think it should be the Skeleton Legion. The only ones who had become enemies with them and had the ability to slaughter the nearby ruined civilizations were probably the fearsome Skeleton Legion. Suyu nodded, confirming both women's guesses at the same time. It could only be the Skeleton Legion. Suyu's eyes shone with a cold light. If the Skeleton Legion wanted revenge, they could come directly. What was the point of slaughtering all the living beings from the nearby civilizations? Did they want to intimidate Suyu and make him live in fear? Or did they want him to regret killing 2 members of the Skeleton Legion? Actually, they would not. That would only make Suyu more determined to exterminate the Skeleton Legion. It's been a long time since I went on a killing spree, Suyu muttered. Although he had fought for a long time, he had not gone on a killing spree for a long time. However, the actions of the Skeleton Battle Group had triggered Suyu's killing intent, which had been suppressed for a long time. He had never felt that people were necessarily good or bad. In the life of a good person, there would always be times when they did wrong. In the life of a bad person, there would also be times when the human heart would shine. Hence, he had never judged a person based on good or bad. But the Skeleton Legion had given Suyu a deep sense of malice. What kind of heartless people could do such a thing? Suyu felt that even if he killed all the members of the Skeleton Legion, none of them would be worthy of sympathy. Boom! At that moment, an extremely bright light streaked across the sky. It was a burning battleship. It was falling from the starry sky, heading straight for the city master's manor. It's coming for us. The sinful lady leaped up to intercept the battleship. She could feel that there was a dangerous energy within the battleship, and it was about to explode. She grabbed the railing of the battleship, stopping it from falling. Then, she pushed the battleship into the sky. As the battleship flew higher and higher, a strange light shot out from the battleship. It was a sign that the battleship was about to explode. The sinful lady glanced inside the battleship, her pupils dilating. The inside and outside of the battleship were filled with self-destruction formations carved with fresh blood. Every formation had living creatures nailed to it. Their methods were extremely cruel. Moreover, the formations were all revolving rapidly at that moment. They were on the verge of exploding. The sinful lady pushed the battleship back into the starry sky. Then, she quickly retreated. Just as she turned around, the battleship behind her exploded. An explosion wave that radiated half of the broken civilization swept through the starry sky. The sinful lady couldn't dodge in time. She was hit by the wave and immediately fell down. Her black clothes were completely burned, and the surface of her body was a bloody mess. Just a moment of shock had caused her such serious injuries. If she had retreated a little later, she might have been killed on the spot. When she was about to fall, Suyu leaped up and held the falling sinful lady in his arms. He immediately healed her injuries with the life domain. Looking at her body that was gradually recovering, he couldn't help but say, "Are you stupid?" She knew it was dangerous, but she didn't retreat as soon as possible. The sinful lady's injuries should have been extremely painful, but she didn't even frown. She tilted her head and pointed to the distance. "If you don't push it away, it will affect the demonic beast you raised." It turned out that she was protecting Suyu's painstaking efforts. Suyu's heart was filled with warmth. Without saying a word, he instilled more life energy into her body. Ryu looked. Wensheng suddenly thought of the scene of the battleship after the explosion. After the explosion wave subsided, a line of bloody words was left. Every word was glaring and hideous. It was as if it was written by an evil spirit from hell. Suyu stared at the bloody words and said slowly, "The debt of blood must be paid in blood." His eyes were filled with intense coldness. These 4 words were very good. It was great that the skeleton battle team had such awareness. Chapter 29:36. The Skeleton Legion did not know who they were going to take revenge on and who they were. They did not even know that they had dug a grave for themselves. Suyu, Shang Yuanxin, and the rest have not returned yet. The sinful lady voiced out her worries. So many creatures from a nearby civilization had been imprisoned and killed. What about Shang Yuanxin and the rest who had gone to investigate the situation? They had not sent back any news, and their safety was unknown. In fact, the sinful lady did not mention that Shang Yuanxin and the rest had most likely met with misfortune. At least, they had fallen into the hands of the skeleton battle group. Otherwise, they would have sent back some news when such a huge commotion had occurred in the outside world. The situation had become very bad. So you did not speak. How would he not have thought of this? The best-case scenario was that Shang Yuanxin had only been captured. The worst-case scenario was that Shang Yuanxin might have been tortured to death. Shang Yuanxin's head might have been among the gifts just now. "Send someone to investigate the location of the skeleton battle group," Suyu said calmly. No one could understand the meaning in his eyes. Only the sinful lady beside him could feel the murderous intent in his eyes. "All right, I will go myself. It will take at most 1 day," the sinful lady said. If anyone else went, they would not be able to guarantee their own safety. She was the only one who could guarantee her own safe return. "Be careful," Suyu said. In terms of strength, apart from him, the strongest person in the entire broken civilization was probably the sinful lady. The sinful lady went to investigate, while Suyu made some preparations. He returned to the secret room, took out the ultimate divine steel, and stared at the various divine techniques carved on it. After a moment, he took a deep breath, took out a drop of his own blood essence, and dripped it onto the ultimate divine steel. However, the drop of blood immediately bounced off, refusing to be refined by Suyu. It would be strange if the ultimate divine steel could be refined so easily. Suyu was not discouraged. He offered a drop of blood essence again, but it was still bounced off. However, Suyu persevered, trying again and again. The blood essence in his body was almost completely drained. However, Suyu still had no intention of giving up. Instead, he continued to try. At this moment, his face had already become incomparably pale due to the loss of blood, and his palms had begun to tremble. However, he did not want to give up. Stubbornness was the worst thing, and refining was no exception. Finally, hard work paid off. After hundreds and thousands of attempts, a drop of blood essence finally landed on the sinkhole divine steel. Although it was bounced off, a trace of blood miraculously entered the sinkhole divine steel. This could be attributed to the fact that Suyu had once controlled half of the returning ruins divine monument for a long period of time. It was only because of this that the returning ruins divine monument had a slight sense of belonging to him. Only then could he successfully integrate this trace of blood. Suyu slowly absorbed the blood essence that had been bounced off into his body. When his complexion returned to normal, he took a deep breath and started to transform the blood essence into a mark, which he then fused into the ultimate divine monument. Under the control of his mind, the strand of blood fused into the depths of the omniscient monument. Moreover, Suyu had to pay a huge price for every bit of it that he managed to fuse with it. In just a short while, Suyu's whole body was drenched in sweat, and his soul energy was depleted, so he had no choice but to stop and rest. Seeing that he was running out of time, Suyu used time acceleration. Under the state of time acceleration of 1,000 times, Suyu began to refine it day after day. And towards the end, the difficulty of the blood wisps fusing into the depths of the sinkhole divine monolith increased. Even after several months, the blood wisps didn't move an inch, and Suyu almost gave up. However, hard work paid off. When a whole day passed, under the state of time acceleration, it was like 3 whole years had passed. The strand of blood finally fused into the depths of the core of the omniscient monument. This meant that Suyu finally had a sliver of control over the omniscient monument. Just as the blood wisps fused into the core, Suyu's mind suddenly roared, and his soul fell uncontrollably into a chaotic world. The world was pale, and everywhere was a vast expanse of whiteness. It was like the depths of a pure white world that had nothing. Suyu was no stranger to such a world. This place was a deserted corner of the omniscient monument. Looking into the distance, the world was dark, and lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Countless dangerous and strange creatures were walking about. Those were the energies of all kinds of creatures. Suyu was excited. The world of returning ruins. Xiener, Xiaoye, Han Xian, wizard ancestor. Their names appeared in Suyu's consciousness one after another. Could he bring them out of the world of returning ruins now? Filled with excitement, he flew toward the place where the creatures were. However, when he reached the border between the white world and the dark world, he was fiercely bounced back by an unknown force. Suyu staggered and was bounced back on the spot. However, the creatures in the dark world did not notice Suyu at all, as if he had never appeared. After many attempts, Suyu found that although he had come to the world of returning ruins, he was confined to the white world, and he could not establish any communication with the creatures inside. To be precise, what Suyu saw was not a creature, but the energy of a person who had returned to the void. It was like Suyu's past self. In a trance, Suyu seemed to see a bamboo forest, a thatched cottage, and a beautiful girl who claimed to be his wife. Suyu hammered the barrier at the border, his heart aching. "Wait for me. I will bring you back sooner or later." Suyu closed his eyes in pain. When he opened them again, his consciousness returned to his body. He had a general understanding of the situation just now. He had indeed refined the omniscient monument of the returning ruins, but only a very small part of it. The White World was Su Yu's territory in the omniscient monument of the returning ruins. However, because the refined part was too small, it was actually separated from the world of returning ruins. Not to mention, affecting the world of returning ruins, he could not even be noticed by the energy of the world of returning ruins. However, this told Su Yu that refining the omniscient monument could indeed allow him to enter the world of returning ruins. Of course, Su Yu's original intention of refining the omniscient monument was not to save Siener and the others. Instead, he was eager to deal with the upcoming skeleton battle. He held the omniscient monument of the returning ruins, and with a thought, he controlled the monument to fly into the air. The engravings on the monument flickered with flickering light, as if it could be moved at Su Yu's command at any time. The engravings on the monument were derived from the Taichu Dao marks. Although the explosive power was not as great as the Taichu Dao marks, it was still extremely terrifying. Once it was used, it would certainly cause great damage to the skeleton battle. Beep beep. His communication jade pendant vibrated, and Su Yu immediately opened it. It was a message from the sinful lady. She did not disappoint, as she had already confirmed the location of the skeleton battle. However, apart from the location information, there was another piece of information, which was that there was an extremely powerful being among the skeleton battle, comparable to the ancient god Jiulong. In the past, the creatures of the 8-star civilizations all regarded the ancient god Jiulong as an existence comparable to the carefree son of heaven. Chapter 29:37. But in reality, from Su Yu's fight with the powerful fighters of the 9-star civilization, he could roughly deduce that ancient god Jiulong's abilities were at the great saint level. That was the second stage of the late-stage master of the heavenly law, far from the level of Emperor Xiaoyao. In other words, there was a great saint-level fighter in the skeleton battle group. Unbelievable, Su Yu murmured. A great saint has become a wanderer, leading a motley crew to kill and plunder. A great saint-level fighter was a figure in a 9-star civilization who could cause the earth to tremble with just a stamp of his foot. Such a figure was not in a 9-star civilization, but in a barren starry sky. Moreover, according to the records, the skeleton battle group's appearance was extremely mysterious. It seemed to have appeared overnight and quickly became a dark force that intimidated the entire starry sky. Su Yu's eyes narrowed. There is something wrong with this skeleton battle group. He put away the divine tablet of the returning ruins, looked at the location in the message, and left. Just as he was about to go to the skeleton battle group to find Sheng Yuanxin and the others, a sea of people had already gathered outside the city master's manor. The city master was trying his best to calm them down, but to no avail. To be precise, they were not panicking, but angry. Every debt has a debtor. Get that bastard out of the broken civilization. Get Su Rushu out of the broken civilization. He should take responsibility for the people he killed. Why should we be implicated? City Master, please stop sheltering that murderer. Hand him over to the skeleton battle group, and we will all be safe. The huge gift from the skeleton army had truly scared the living beings of the broken civilization out of their wits. They had nowhere to run, and the fear in their hearts was magnified. They vented all their anger on the culprit, Su Yu. They felt that Su Yu had killed the members of the skeleton battle group. As the saying went, every debt has a debtor. Since it was Su Yu's doing, he should bear the responsibility himself and not implicate the innocent living beings. City Master Wen Yuan comforted them. Everyone, you can't say that. The members of the skeleton battle group came to our broken civilization to commit crimes. Su Rushu could have just stood by and watched, but why did he intervene? Could it be that he had nothing better to do? Could it not be that he hated evil and felt injustice for all of you? Now, the skeleton battle group came for revenge, and you push him out? What is this? Are you heartless and ungrateful, or are you biting the hand that feeds you? The immense fear made it so that ordinary beings didn't even think about it seriously. In order to survive, all sense of propriety, justice, and honor had collapsed in an instant. Moreover, as vagrants, they were either sinners themselves, or how much awareness could they have after becoming a sinner? Nonsense! The crowd retorted fiercely. We didn't ask him to do anything. He was the one who meddled in our business and caused trouble. Why shouldn't he take responsibility? Yeah, didn't the skeleton group not do anything? What if they just came and left? It was originally fine, but he poked a hornet's nest the moment he made a move. That's right, he must pay for his recklessness. The excitement of the crowd drowned out the voice of the city lord. The people had already lost their rationality, lost their ability to think. City Lord Wen Yuan felt extremely sorrowful, extremely angry. They were all lying to themselves. Since when did the members of the Skeleton Legion not cause a massacre after appearing? Back then, if Suyu had not killed the 3 powerful members of the Skeleton Legion, the dilapidated civilization would have become a graveyard long ago. Now, after they chased Suyu away, would the Skeleton Legion let go of the dilapidated civilization and only target Suyu? Dream on. With the Skeleton Legion's ferocious reputation, the dilapidated civilization would definitely not be spared. Without the protection of a strong martial artist like Suyu, the dilapidated civilization would only be destroyed faster and more thoroughly. You are all muddle-headed, City Lord Wen Yuan shouted in pain. Unfortunately, the living beings couldn't hear him. They only wanted to hand Suyu over, firmly believing that they would be lucky. He was about to shout, but Suyu appeared without anyone noticing, patting his shoulder. Don't waste your energy. People only want to believe in what they believe. Did they not understand the bloodthirsty style of the Skeleton Legion? Not only did they know, they had also seen it. Even the innocent nearby civilizations have been massacred by the Skeleton Legion, all of them brutally tortured to death. How could the dilapidated civilization have been spared? They were just being lucky. After handing Suyu over, the Skeleton Legion would change their minds. They were simply lying to themselves. Elder Su, the city lord, immediately cupped his fists. He was extremely grateful to Suyu. Not only had Suyu saved Wenyuan City, but he had also saved his father and daughter. Suyu had even generously gifted his daughter with the precious primordial energy. Suyu's kindness was greater than the heavens, and the city lord respected Suyu greatly. Hence, he had stood his ground and protected Suyu. Suyu smiled. Go down and rest. But City Lord Wen Yuan looked at the boundless crowd of living beings, scanning their fearful and ferocious gazes. He was extremely worried. They did not have the slightest bit of kindness towards Suyu. Suyu waved his hands. No matter. Go and take stock of those who are willing to follow me. Also, take care of all the things that can be taken away. His words were very clear. He was leaving, no longer caring about the lives of the living beings of the dilapidated civilization. He did not conceal his words. He had said them in front of all the living beings of the dilapidated civilization. Many of the living beings revealed a sliver of fear in their eyes. If you want to leave, leave by yourself. Why are you taking the city lord and the rest with you? That's right. If the city lord is gone, what are we going to do? If you want to leave, leave by yourself. The crowd shouted angrily, as if they were in the right. It was as if someone was born to protect them. Ignorant and foolish. Suyu shook his head. This was how blind living beings were. They forcefully placed their hopes on others, regardless of whether that person was obligated to bear the responsibility. Suyu looked at them and said, Why should I take them with me? Because you are not worthy of my protection. If you can hand me over today, you can hand over the city lord tomorrow. The day after that, you can hand over the rest of the people who helped you. I will be abandoned by you sooner or later. Why should I stay and protect you for free? No one owes you anything, and no one needs to protect you. As he spoke, he released the powerful cultivation of a middle-stage heavenly lawmaster, which was extremely intimidating. From now on, take care of yourselves. I will leave immediately. Suyu turned around, leaving behind the living beings who had fallen into an even greater panic. Suyu shook his head slightly. These living beings had no faith. The only faith they had was himself. They were not worthy of Suyu's help. City Lord Wen Yuan looked reluctant and said, Senior Su. Suyu waved his hands and said, I only help those who need help. They no longer need me, so why should I help them? Looking at the sky, he said, I will only give you 2 hours to prepare. Chapter 29:38. What could 2 hours do? Wouldn't it take more than an hour to send a message to the entire broken civilization? But seeing Su Yu's serious expression, the Wenyuan city master did not dare delay. He immediately ordered his trusted aides to make the announcement to the outside world. He hurriedly went to pack his things, trying to bring the most important things with him. Seeing that the city master was really going to abandon them, the ferocious creatures were all agitated. They were panicking and angry, as if they had been greatly wronged. Wenyuan city master, we saw you as the new hope of the broken civilization and agreed to merge with Wenyuan city. But now you are abandoning us. Are you worthy of our trust in you? Similar voices could be heard from the crowd. Wenyuan city master heard them, no longer struggling in his heart. He had already seen through these so-called citizens. They were asking him, the city master, to contribute as if it was a matter of course. But if there was trouble, he would be pushed out mercilessly like Su Yu. Seeing through this, Wenyuan city master was expressionless. He gathered all those who were willing to leave with him. Most of them were former residents of profound learning city, and they had deep trust in the city lord. So they immediately followed the summons. Time passed slowly. Just as they were packing their things, a voice came from beyond the heavens. Hand over the culprit, and we will let bygones be bygones. Resistance will only lead to death. The crowd looked up to see a small golden boat slowly descending into the broken civilization under the protection of several strong fighters from the Skull Team. On top of the small boat stood a person with a cold expression. He was none other than Xiaoyan. She was the one who had led the Skull Team back to the broken civilization to take revenge for the sins she had once suffered. At this moment, looking at the surging emotions of the broken civilization, she was very satisfied with the result. The reason why these living creatures had been incited to denounce Su Yu is not without reason. She had contacted the old officials of the first city, and with their secret instigation, this great denunciation had come. Their goal was to chase Su Yu out of the broken civilization so that they could kill him. Secondly, if they did not chase Su Yu away, wouldn't it be very troublesome to destroy the broken civilization? Looking at the surging crowd below, Xiaoyan laughed coldly in her heart. What a bunch of pigs. She had returned to take revenge on Su Yu and Wen Cheng, and to destroy the civilization that had witnessed her humiliating history. Xiaoyan, City Lord Wen Yuan, Wen Cheng, and the others were all surprised. When Xiaoyan was captured by the Skeleton Legion, he actually did not die. From the looks of it, he had become a rather important person in the Skeleton Legion. What's wrong? Are you surprised? Xiaoyan seemed to be smiling, and there was an indescribable viciousness hidden in his smile. The profound knowledge city lord spoke in a serious tone. Xiaoyan, don't try to mislead us with your lies. You know very well what kind of people the Skeleton Squadron is. They will not let go of a broken civilization. Hee. Xiaoyan stared at City Lord Wen Yuan's nervous expression and let out a breath of turbid air. What? Are you afraid? Since you're afraid, then hand Su Yu over. Otherwise, the Skeleton Legion's army will soon arrive and kill all of you. As soon as these words came out, all living beings fell into a complete panic. City Lord Wen Yuan, quickly hand Su Yu over. Are you trying to get us all killed? You muddle-headed City Lord. You still refuse to come to your senses. Quickly hand him over. The crowd roared hysterically, as if they had seen their last hope. City Lord Wen Yuan was unmoved, coldly saying, a bunch of fools. Looking at the crowd of angry, ignorant living beings, City Lord Wen Yuan knew that he could not stay any longer. Who knew what the instigators would do to them? Stop packing and leave immediately, City Lord Wen Yuan shouted. The people who had followed him immediately gathered around Su Yu, ready to leave at any moment. The angry living beings had already begun to destroy the City Lord's manor, forcing their way in and surrounding them. All of them looked as if they had a huge grudge against Su Yu. Luckily, even though they had the advantage in numbers, Su Yu's abilities were still fresh in their minds, and they did not dare attack. Xiaoyan laughed coldly. If she continued to force them, she believed that she could easily force Su Yu and the rest out. But she did not intend to do so. Since she was here for revenge, she would take revenge to the end. Wen Cheng, do you think you can escape alive? Xiaoyan suddenly locked her gaze onto Wencheng. The latter's expression changed slightly. To be honest, Wencheng did not have the slightest bit of confidence, even though he had seen how extraordinary Su Yu's attacks were. However, what they were facing now was the world-famous skeleton battle group. Now that the living beings of the broken civilization were all out to attack Su Yu, they had no intention of working together. How could Su Yu and them, who were weak, resist the skeleton battle group? It was very likely that they would end up like the countless heads. I will give you and your father a chance to live. Xiaoyan was smiling, but she was laughing maliciously in her heart. Wencheng had always been wary of Xiaoyan. What chance? She asked weakly. She could already imagine what Xiaoyan's request would be. It would probably be for her to kneel down in front of everyone, kowtow, and admit her mistake. Xiaoyan had always been a self-centered woman. She must want her to admit her mistake now, right? But Xiaoyan's reply caused Wencheng's face to turn red. She was furious. Very simple. Take off your clothes and let the living beings of the broken civilization see their fill. Xiaoyan could not help but recall her nightmarish memory of being possessed by Marquis Wolf. That was a pain that she could not erase for the rest of her life. All of this originated from Wencheng and Su Yu. Thus, she wanted Wencheng to suffer the same humiliation. Only then could she alleviate a portion of the hatred in his heart. Wencheng was furious. You shameless woman. She clenched the front of her clothes, weakly shouting. How could she do such a thing? Then I'm sorry, but you and your father will both have to die, Xiaoyan said coldly. When your father's corpse falls in front of you, you will regret it. You sacrificed your father for a piece of clothing. One unfilial daughter. Wencheng clenched her fists. This kind of fallacious reasoning sounded very reasonable, but in reality, it was a complete mess. But she had to admit that if her father really died because of this, she would feel guilty. I'll give you one more chance to consider. Do you agree or not? Xiaoyan said. The surrounding living beings became much quieter, especially the male living beings. They all looked toward Xiaoyan. Some of them even had a hint of schadenfreude, anticipation, and passion. Although Wencheng was not particularly beautiful, her status was incomparably respected, and she was as pure as ice and clean as jade. To be able to see her naked body was a rare treat for the eyes. Chapter 29:39. Wencheng was encouraged. Indeed, did she really expect Xiaoyan to keep her promise and release her father? The answer was obviously no. Isn't it just death? What's the big deal? I'll die with my father. It's better than you living alone in this world. Wencheng said, mustering her courage. Xiaoyan wanted to humiliate them, but failed. His eyes were filled with hostility, and his viciousness increased instead. Fellow people of the broken civilization, Wen Yuan and his daughter have persecuted the common people and disregarded your lives. They are heartless and unjust. On behalf of the skeleton group, I promise you that anyone who can obtain the first drop of Wencheng's blood and obtain her body will be pardoned. Not only that, but we will also give you a city's worth of resources. What? The living creatures were excited. Not only would they be spared from death, they would also be given the resources of a city. Did that not mean that they could become a city master overnight? The living creatures stared at Wencheng like hungry wolves. The meaning in their eyes was self-evident. If not for Su Yu, they will have already pounced forward and torn Wencheng to pieces. Are you still not going to act? Xiaoyan said. I will only give you 10 breaths of time. She laughed sinisterly. She wanted to see Wencheng suffer the same pain and despair that she had suffered. As for Su Yu, he could only watch, unable to change a thing. She did not believe that Su Yu would be able to contend with the living creatures of the broken civilization. As soon as she said this, the living creatures could no longer hold themselves back. They all charged forward with bloodshot eyes. Brothers, the city master and his daughter have let us down. Take down Wencheng. We will fight for our lives. Amidst the roars, the living creatures were finally moved. They surged forward like a tide. City Master Wen Yuan was shocked. Quick, take Wencheng and leave first. I will hold him off. With a push of his palm, he pushed Wencheng into Su Yu's arms while he stood in front. He had already prepared himself for the worst. He wanted to protect his only daughter. At this moment, he had seen through this group of so-called living creatures. Just as Suyu had said, when the time came, he could immediately abandon the city master. Wasn't his daughter the best proof of that? What was there to protect about such a living creature? However, what made City Master Wen Yuan feel a chill was that Suyu had no intention of leaving. He merely pulled Wen Cheng to his side. Then, he unhurriedly extended his finger and pointed at the living beings that were swarming over from all directions. His eyes were cold as he said, "I'll give you one last chance. Scram and leave my sight forever." It was a pity that the bewitched creatures didn't take Suyu seriously because they had the advantage in numbers. "Brothers, we have the advantage in numbers. Don't be afraid. Charge. Whoever obtains Wen Cheng first will be the next city lord." The only sound in the crowd was the morbid cries. Suyu closed his eyes and calmly said, "I've already given you a chance." He spun on the spot and swept his fingers in all directions. Puff, puff. All the creatures in the surroundings exploded into a mist of blood. Within a radius of 10,000 li, apart from his own people, everyone else was flattened into a bloody mist. The creatures that were pouncing over felt their scalps go numb when they saw this. They all stopped and didn't dare to take another step forward. What is his strength? He actually slaughtered innocent people. It's intolerable. It's intolerable. As they spoke, they retreated as if 10,000 li away was a safe zone. Suyu didn't speak. He swept his eyes around again. Puff. This time, all the living beings within 100,000 li exploded into a mist of blood, leaving nothing behind. The deafening cries finally stopped for the most part. The creatures that were 100,000 li away looked at the endless sea of blood and finally felt the fear that came from their souls. No matter how they were incited before, at this moment, they were frantically fleeing in horror. No one dared to complain anymore, and no one dared to reprimand Suyu. At this moment, they finally realized that their lives were insignificant in Suyu's eyes. They were like dust. Suyu had never been a kind person, let alone anyone's protector. In the blink of an eye, the many creatures retreated like a tide, and no one made a racket. Suyu retracted his finger and said lightly, "It's finally quiet." He didn't make a move, and these creatures thought he was afraid of them. They didn't know that it was just Suyu restraining himself. Unfortunately, they kept challenging Suyu's bottom line. After killing all the troublemakers, Suyu looked up at Xiao Yin in the sky and said lightly, "Enemies aren't scary, but traitors are." Xiao Yin sucked in a breath of cold air. She knew that Suyu was powerful, but she never thought that he was powerful enough to destroy countless lives with a single finger. Moreover, he was cruel and merciless without mercy. Her soft body trembled, and without a word, she steered the small boat away. As she walked, she crushed a life-saving treasure. Suyu's eyes shot out, and two solid rays of light, like sharp swords in the sky, easily shattered the small boat. The strong skeletons near the small boat turned into a mist of blood in an instant. Xiaoyan was extremely lucky. She activated the life-saving treasure at the critical moment, leaving only a substitute stone on the spot, and successfully escaped. Suyu rose into the air and let go of the lotus seat of evil crossing. "Go in, all of you. I'll let you out when it's safe." City Master Wen Yuan and the others immediately led their people in, leaving Suyu alone. He closed his eyes, and with a thought, he traversed the boundless Milky Way, reaching a faraway place. In just a few short hours, he appeared near the dilapidated civilization. On one of the dilapidated civilizations, the sinful lady's figure flickered. She pointed at the dilapidated civilization. "This is the civilization closest to us, the Blackwater civilization, the stronghold of the skeleton troop." Blackwater civilization? What Suyu saw was a blood-red civilization. Without a doubt, it was dyed red by the blood of countless lives. "Gather all the demonic beasts that we have tamed and guard this place. Unless the great sage-level skeleton troop leader appears, kill everyone else. Leave no one alive." "All right," the sinful lady said expressionlessly. She was also extremely disdainful of the skeleton troop's outrageous actions. It was better to completely destroy such an extremely evil creature. Suyu clasped his hands behind his back and entered the Blackwater civilization. The moment he stepped in, he saw an endless number of corpses. Most of them had lost their heads. Not far away, the members of the skeleton troop were searching the corpses for valuables. Suyu could not be bothered with these small fries. He released his powerful soul, enveloping the entire dilapidated civilization. At the same time, his soul energy vibrated, and a sharp soul voice was transmitted into the ears of every living being. Come out and receive your death.